Howl of the Rejected, Sunderverse, Wild Packs Book 1, written by Ingrid Seymour, narrated by Emma Lisi. Chapter 1. I whirled in the dark, searching for Tello. Where was he? He'd been behind me just a few seconds ago. My breaths were so loud I couldn't hear anything else. The night was an oppressive dark shroud, and the trees around me were giants that served as hiding places for my enemies. "Jazz, don't stop," Val urged, ahead of me as he ran. He was almost to the top of the hill, about 50 yards away. "But Tello," I hissed desperately. "I don't know where he is. He was right behind me." Val halted, glancing back and gesturing with one hand for me to hurry. "Magistrate Magnus will keep him safe. Come on, hurry." I hesitated a moment, but had to trust that they'd be all right. With one last glance back, I started climbing uphill again. My legs burned, but I had to keep going. We needed to get out of wildling territory. A shape flew at me from behind a tree. I cried out in pain as a shoulder rammed into my side and thick arms enveloped me. We rolled down the rocky hill, grunting and struggling. When we finally came to a stop, my attacker was on top, pinning me down. I stared into luminous green eyes. Sharp canines gleamed as the savage leered at me with hatred. "Filthy city rat," he said in a barely intelligible voice. I tried to reach for my weapon, but I couldn't move. He leaned closer, his fingers dug into my shoulders, claws prickling through the fabric of my uniform coat. Panic building in my chest, I pushed, but he was a wall of pure muscle. His chest was bare, and his skin and taut sinew shone under the dim moonlight. I bucked. He pushed a leg between mine and jammed it against my crotch. I froze in shock at the brazen move. The wildling angled his sharp teeth toward my throat. I growled, pushing, but it was useless. When his mouth touched my skin, he stopped and inhaled deeply. I shuddered as he went utterly still. I braced myself for death, but he pulled away. His shifter eyes locked with mine. He appeared confused. His savage features softened slightly. He opened his mouth as if to say something, and then his head and gaze snapped up. "Get your filthy paws off her," Val screamed as he barreled in our direction. My attacker jumped off me with inhuman speed, and a split second later, Val's sword slashed through the air right at the level where the wildling's neck had been. Val ran after him toward the trees, shouting hoarsely, sword held high. I rolled onto my side, wincing. "Val, no!" Gratefully, he stopped, and we watched the wildling disappear among the many tree trunks and bushes. Clenching my teeth and holding my side, I rose to my feet. Val faced me. "Are you all—" "Run!" Magistrate Magnus ordered, appearing at a bend at the bottom of the hill. "Run, you idiots!" We ran, and it wasn't until we reached the top of the hill that I stopped to wonder where Tello was. The wolf wildings killed Tello, and now all we could do was watch from the top of the ridge as they tore him to pieces. Val had an arm around my waist, holding me back as I fought to get free and do some tearing of my own. I wanted to run back down there and kill them, rip them apart, and spread chunks of their flesh all over the forest for all the wild packs to find. We'd lost so many of our peers this way that I couldn't stand the thought of losing another, even if that was the nature of Lux Academy. "Settle down, Initiate Jasmine," Magistrate Magnus growled. He was standing a few paces away, his back to us, with the dark sky and large moon as his backdrop. I kept struggling. "Please, Jazz," Val whispered in my ear. You'll get us all killed. We're outnumbered and it's a full moon." I went limp, his words piercing through my anger and turning it to acceptance. Val released me and I dropped to my knees, a choking pressure in my throat. Magistrate Magnus was standing at the edge of the ridge, looking at the valley below. He wore the hood of his black robe over his head, obscuring wrinkles too deep for his age, and a beard that had gone white ahead of his light brown hair. "They desecrate him," he spat in his grumbling voice. Anger trembled in his words and swept through us. Val joined the magistrate, his back straight as a rod. He would watch and learn firsthand about the wildling's savagery. The lessons were almost over for us, and, after Preventus, our graduation, this would become our lives. There was no running from it. Not that we wanted to. Skews, perverse supernaturals, infected the rest of the world, but they didn't belong here, and we would fight to root the infection from our lands. I stood on shaky legs and went to stand next to Val and the magistrate. Tello wouldn't get a chance to graduate because he'd been brave and had tried to fight. I couldn't be a coward and also miss my chance. Few were chosen to fight the wild skews, and those who hid from the truth were not among them. As I joined them, Magistrate Magnus glanced at me sideways and gave me a slight nod. He would forgive my outburst, see that I'd gotten myself under control. The other magistrates might not be so forgiving. Discipline was paramount. But he was reasonable, more than most of them, anyway. I forced myself to watch, same as Val. Our long coats flapped in the wind, and below, a trail of smoke snaked toward the sky. The wildlings had started a fire and had lain Tello next to it. Under the glow of the moonlight and the flames, I could make out his outline. He had fought bravely, giving us three the chance to escape. Guilt washed over me again, the same way as it had as we'd run up the mountain while he stood his ground and faced the tetrad. 3 werewolves and their alpha. I would have gone back and fought beside him, but Magistrate Magnus didn't allow it. Not when we'd told him of the wildling that had attacked me. The magistrate's magic had disguised our path, and we'd managed to confuse the wildling's keen senses. But we'd lost Tello. I clenched my teeth to hold back a scream. Wildlings and their barbaric ways. "Not many initiates get to witness this," Magistrate Magnus said. "I was 20 the first time I saw." His voice wavered. I lowered my head, not daring to glance in his direction. I'd never heard him be anything but firm, even when he named the dead after our dawn cleansing sessions. I wonder who he'd lost the first time he saw that still made him falter now. Howls rent the night. My eyes snapped back to the dancing flames and Tello's immobile shape on the dusty ground. 3 wolves had positioned themselves at Tello's feet, facing their alpha, who stood by Tello's head. The leader's tattooed arms stretched toward the heavens as he swayed from side to side. I knew from my studies that he was chanting in victory, but I couldn't hear him from where we stood. After a long moment lost in his ecstasy, the alpha dropped to his knees and opened Tello's blood-soaked shirt, revealing his broad chest. I fought the urge to turn away at the sight of his ruined torso. It looked as if the wolves had tried to disembowel him, but it was no surprise. Their savagery and violence knew no limits, and their thirst for blood was insatiable. Just to prove my point, the alpha pressed his hands to Tello's chest, then brought them up to his face. Swaying on his knees, he wiped the blood across his cheeks. The wolves howled again, stirred into a frenzy, waiting for the next step in their barbaric ritual. Pulling a knife from the belt at his waist, the alpha presented it to his pack. They howled once more, lowering their heads, eyes flashing with the firelight. My fist closed around a handful of my coat. Next to me, Val shook on the spot. When we left Lux City so late in the afternoon, we'd known the dangers, and yet we'd been excited to accompany Magistrate Magnus, Tello more than Val or me. The magistrate had met with someone, a woman who'd given him a sealed parcel. We didn't know who she was or what was in the package, but it wasn't our business to ask. We'd come on foot, an hour north of the academy. "Maybe we'll run into a tetrad, and we'll teach them a lesson," he'd said, always so ready to fight, so brave. I wished we would have stayed in our dorm, talking, fooling around. Instead, now, the Alpha lifted the knife with both hands and held it over his head. By the light. The blade came down. I held my breath and imagined a thud, followed by a wet, squelching sound. The Alpha's arms worked up and down, up and down. When he was done cutting, he dropped the knife to the ground and stuck his hand in the hole. It came away bloody. He ran his fingers over his face. Was he tasting the blood? I couldn't tell from this distance, but whatever it was horrid. Beasts. We stood frozen, too shocked to turn away from the horror. My stomach clenched painfully, and my heart lodged in my throat. I could barely breathe. After a long moment, Magistrate Magnus gave an audible inhale and said, "We must go." "But," I protested, "maybe we could bury him when they leave." "You know well there'll be nothing left to bury," he said, walking south in Lux City's direction. The earth must return to the earth. It was the only way to give anyone proper rest, and now Tello wouldn't even have that. Instead, he would be devoured, digested in the guts of those filthy beasts. Magistrate Magnus stopped and extended a hand to indicate we should walk ahead of him. He wanted to keep an eye on us, probably expecting us to linger or attempt something even more stupid than that. "We must tread carefully," he said. "My magic is exhausted." Val and I exchanged a glance. Like me, he was probably wishing we were already able to cast magic. But that wouldn't be possible until after Preventus, once the ink bracelets around our wrists, our codas, were complete. Pulling up my sleeve, I examined mine under the moonlight that seeped through the trees. "We'll get the last of our ink soon," Val said. "Don't worry." There was only a half-inch gap left to fill and make one end of the tattoo connect with the other. Each different pattern in the bracelet represented a year at Lux, and once the bracelet was complete, we would no longer be initiates. We would be apprentices, assigned to one of the magistrates. I looked over at Magistrate Magnus, hoping, as always, to be assigned to him, if I was even selected, and not dismissed back into the world. "We'll make them pay for what they did," Val whispered. "We got a good look at one of them. We'll find their pack." "We will," I said, too loudly. He put a finger to his lips and threw a quick glance over his shoulder. I nodded once, Tello's jovial face flashing before my eyes, and the desire for revenge swelling in my chest like a disease. A month from now was the last day of indulgence, and he wouldn't be with us to enjoy it. I held back my tears and made a silent pledge. "They'll pay for what they did to you, Tello. I promise." Chapter 2. Girls were jutting their hips and winking at me. At me? Really? What the hell? I glanced away. They were wasting their time twofold. I was not available. My Lux Academy uniform let them know that, and I was not a guy. They would be mighty disappointed when they took a closer look between my legs and didn't find the bits they were hoping to arouse. Of course, my close-cropped hair and hips and boobs hidden under my coat didn't help them make a distinction. But still. It had been 2 weeks since Tello's death. He should be here with us, celebrating, but the space to my left was empty. The air carried a sharp bite, typical for late April in northern Maine. Lux City lay in the Carabasset Valley, south of Flagstaff Lake. It was blessedly closed to outsiders, a place free of skews and the depravity found in places as close as Augusta, not to mention Boston or New York. Our community had remained the same for hundreds of years since colonists settled in the area. Everyone who lived here was proud to be Luxian. Uniformed academy students went in and out of the shops and ran down the streets, whooping, enjoying their free day. The town square and surrounding streets were closed to traffic and alive with people in the mood for celebration. Spring was here in force. The sun was out. The last day of indulgence had arrived, and it was a yearly affair. "They really like you." Back from the baker's shop, Val elbowed me and handed me a pistachio pastry. Honey dripped from the thin pieces of pastry onto a paper napkin. Delicious. Thanks, my favorite. I took a bite, then moaned from pleasure. From across the cobble street, one of the girls blew me a kiss, then giggled along with her friend. They wore tight jeans, tall boots, and very tight tops, and, despite the chilly temperature, it seemed they'd left their jackets at home. Their hair bounced in an impossible way. I had no idea how they managed that. Why do they act like that? I turned away, blushing, and took another bite of my pastry. Val turned with me. There was a twinkle in his eye, and I knew just what he had on his dirty mind. "I know it is the last day of indulgence, Val," I said, "but you can't possibly be considering." I trailed off, looking over my shoulder at the two girls. Their boobs were squeezed so tight together they looked like overripe, pale, jiggly melons. Gah, even the wildings covered their fruits better than that. "I am considering it," Val said, "but I think they won't be happy if you don't come with me." He pressed his two red lips into a thin line, obviously trying to repress a smile. I glanced over at the girls again to see if, with Val standing next to me, they'd finally realized I wasn't a guy. One of them stared directly at me and bit her lower lip. Nope, no such luck. I was tall and slender compared to them, but nothing like Val. He was half a foot taller than me, in all angles and broad chest. He had a wide jaw, thick eyebrows, and his steel blue eyes carried a menace that was strictly male. He was imposing in the academy black uniform. We all looked good in them. The sharp cut of the coat accentuated our waists and broadened our shoulders. The malleable leather pants hugged our muscular thighs, and the sword and tall boots with its silver-plated accents simply made us look bad. The uniform had been the same for centuries. Some less traditional magistrates wanted to exchange the swords for guns, but tradition was everything at the academy. Besides, the wildings didn't use firearms, and proper magistrates liked a fair and balanced fight. A woman pushing a cart full of fresh flowers approached. Wheels clanked against the cobblestones. "After she passes by, we can sneak away behind her cart," I suggested. Except Val was already crossing the street, his polished boots tapping firmly, the tip of his sword peeking from under his long coat. "Such a hot guy going in the service, what a freaking shame!" I could almost hear the girls complain. Val, with his steely eyes and confidence. They seemed to forget we were all orphans, lucky to have been accepted into the folds of the ancient institution and shaped into valuable members of society. Yep, the uniform had power. Across the street, Val pointed at me, causing one of the girls to smile broadly. What was he telling them? I shoved the rest of the pastry into my mouth, dabbed at my honeyed lips with the napkin, and threw it into a trash can. I wanted to go off on my own in search of more sweets. Val could indulge himself with those girls, but I wasn't about to waste my last day flirting with a girl who thought I was a guy. If I was interested in that sort of indulgence, I would find a handsome, broad-chested, hard-muscled dude. My gaze traveled lazily in Val's direction. To my dismay, he was coming back, a full smile displaying his perfect teeth. I looked left and right, searching for an escape. Any escape? Jazz? He said in that tone I knew well, the overly sweet one he always used when he wanted something from me. No. I shook my head and took a step back. Please, Jazz, it may be my last chance to, you know. He put his hands together in prayer and gave me hungry puppy eyes. And what about me? I demanded. He frowned. I didn't realize you wanted to. Oh, no, not that. I made a face of disgust. I mean, I don't want to waste my last day indulging you. There are plenty more sweets I intend to eat, and I want to go by the amphitheater to watch the play. I promise you, we'll still do all of that. He glanced back sadly at the girls as if they were mirages that would soon blink out of existence, which I guessed they were since, after today, we were to be celibate, along with a number of other things, including moderate in all habits. Hence my need for obscene amounts of sweets and entertainment. Wouldn't it be better if you never knew what you're missing? I asked. Imagine if you had never eaten a pistachio pastry, or a honey cake, or any strawberry confections. My mouth watered at the mention of all my favorite desserts. Stop talking blasphemy, I snapped. Val shrugged and put his hands up as if saying, see what I mean? Couldn't you take both of them? Val cocked his head to one side, pondering. Maybe I could, but the blonde one wants you. She said she won't come if you don't. By Lux, are you joking? I'm not. Please, I'll muck out your horse for a week. I hated mucking out my horse's stall, and Val knew it. It was a twice-a-day chore I could do without, especially when, as an initiate, I didn't get to ride through the mountains chasing wildings. Maybe, once I became an apprentice and killed my first wildling, I would feel differently about it. Okay. I gave up and took the deal. But be quick about it. He made a face, then shrugged, probably realizing it would go quick anyhow, since he hadn't been with a girl in a while. We had to be back in our dorm by 10 p.m. It was 6 now, and I would get my treats one way or another. The world didn't revolve around Valentine Farrow. Thank you. He patted my shoulder, then dragged me across the street, straight toward the flirty blonde. Chapter 3. Hello, the girl said, blinking in quick succession and tucking a blonde curl behind her ear. My name is Emily. What's yours? Her cheeks were red with blush, and her skin smoother than a slab of marble. Jazz, I said, making my voice deeper and feeling rather unfeminine and sun-weathered. I did a lot of drills under the harsh sun and wind. My skin was amber-colored to begin with. I had First Nation blood in me for sure. But all the training had kicked it into bronze. Lux City was a mixture of skin colors since the first colonists had intermarried with the natives, though that was before they had learned of their treachery. She frowned at my name. Jasmone, Val added quickly. I stared daggers in his direction. He went by Val, and he never worried it might be mistaken for a woman's name. Jasmone, the girl repeated, wrinkling her nose. I can see why you go by Jazz. I forced a smile. Same reason why Valafred goes by Val. Yikes, the other girl said. It seems the Academy needs some help coming up with names for its recruits. The Academy named us all and wasn't in need of help in this area or any others. They gave all the orphans honorable names, including Latin last names that represented something about us. Val's was Pharaoh for the steel in his gaze. Mine was Bronte for the thunder in my cry when I was a baby. Why don't we take a walk? Val asked, extending a hand down the sidewalk. Sure. Emily hooked her arm in mine. I bit down hard and fought the urge to push her away. Val owed me, big time. I would have to make my horse eat double this week. Tell me about you, Jazz, Emily said, leaning closer as we followed Val and... what was the other girl's name? I had no idea. Do you exercise a lot? She squeezed my biceps through my coat, almost making me jump. Was she always like this? Or was it because it was the last day of indulgence? You're so tall and handsome, she said, punctuating her words with a pinch to my... This time I did jump away from her, my mouth opening and closing as I tried to think of something to distract her. Val said you were shy, but there is no reason to be. Emily batted her eyelashes and licked her lips seductively. I felt my pistachio pastry making its way back up my throat. My face burned. I glanced around at the passers-by, embarrassed, but no one seemed to have noticed, least of all Val, who had his arm around his girl's waist and was pulling her in for a quick kiss. Crap, what did I get myself into? Was Emily expecting me to kiss her? What an interesting birthmark, she said, running 2 fingers over my cropped hair near my right temple. It looks like a waning moon. Waxing, I said, leaning away from her touch. Huh? A waxing moon, not a waning moon, I corrected. She rolled her eyes. Whatever. Apprehension building, I noticed we'd reach Paradise Street, an area perfectly designed for anyone with bad habits to indulge. Food, drink, gambling, and any number of diversions could be found for the next 10 blocks. Unsurprisingly, the streets were full of uniformed initiates like Val and me. I spotted a couple of our peers staggering into a bar and wished Val had more interest in beer than women. Paper lanterns illuminated every corner, blotting the quickly darkening sky. The scent of grilled meat and freshly baked rolls made my mouth water. Garlands of black and silver hung from lamppost to lamppost, matching the Academy colors and our uniforms to perfection. Lux City was vibrant, beautiful, and safe thanks to the magistrates and their apprentices who kept the wildlings in their place, away from all the places they had once corrupted with their ignorance and barbaric practices. Determined to enjoy myself, I turned to Emily. Would you like a honey cake? I pointed at a street vendor. A honey cake? she repeated, as if I were offering her a skewered squirrel like the ones the wildlings favored. No, baby, there's only one type of honey I'm interested in. Before I could figure out what she meant, she grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me into a narrow alley, the same way Val and the other girl had gone. I stumbled forward as Emily spun me around and pushed me against the wall. Further down the alley, and locked in a passionate kiss, Val pushed his companion behind a tall wooden crate. Apparently he was going to get what he wanted as quickly as he'd promised. Now all I had to do was keep Emily's busy hands off me. Chapter 4. Emily got on tiptoes, eyes closed and lips pursed, ready for a kiss. Wincing, I pushed back against the wall, turning my face away and hoping Val's stamina was as small as his patience. For a crazy moment, I imagined it was me with him behind that crate. But I quickly pushed the idea aside. Thoughts like that were likely to get me kicked out of the academy, no matter how promising or successful an initiate I might be. Affairs between students were strictly forbidden, probably because it would make a lifetime of celibacy together awkward. Undeterred by my refusal to kiss her, she slid her hand up my stomach, making sounds of pleasure as she felt my muscles through my uniform. I went stiff and slapped her hand away as she inched closer to my breasts. "Ow!" she complained when I swiftly spun around, pushed her against the wall, and took a step away from her. Her chin quivered, and she pressed a hand to her chest, an injured expression on her face. "Look," I said, "it's not you, it's me." She sniffed. "Lux, this is so humiliating. I'm sorry, Deep inside the alley, a movement caught my eye. 2 bright dots shone in the darkness well past Val's crate. "Val!" I pulled out my sword from my metal scabbard with a zing. "Something's back there." Next to me, Emily shrieked and ran out of the alley. Val walked into the open, pulling out his own sword and fumbling with the buttons on his shirt. He urged the girl to walk out, protecting her with his body. They backed away slowly, the girl pressing her removed top to her boobs. Val stopped when he reached me, his eyes drilling into the depths of the alley, same as mine. The girl ran off calling her friend's name. "What is it?" he asked. "Wolf's eyes." We were quiet for a moment, staring, waiting. The glowing eyes didn't reappear. "How dare they come here, and today?" Val asked in a near growl. "We need to pass the word," I said. "The other initiates needed to be on the lookout. People should probably be evacuated, but any mention of wildlings would cause a panic. And what if I was imagining things?" He nodded. We backed out of the alley and sheathed our swords as discreetly as possible. I gave Val a sideways glance. "Sorry about your, but I did see something back there." "No need to apologize, I believe you. She wasn't a very good kisser anyway." He wiped his fingers around his chin. "Did she slobber like a wolf wildling?" I laughed, trying to ease my nerves. The news of her lousy abilities made me glad for some reason. I'd never kissed a guy, never met one that made me want to, but I was sure I wouldn't have licked his face. My gaze strayed to Val's red lips for a second, then I shook my head and peered back toward the spot where I'd seen those eyes. But whatever had been there was now gone. "Let's go." He gestured down the street. We moved swiftly along the crowded streets, stopping our peers and whispering to them to be alert. After 30 minutes of strolling up and down the street and keeping our eyes peeled, I began to relax and believe I had imagined the whole thing. I'd wanted to escape Emily's tentacle hands, after all. I bought a honey cake at one of the street vendors, while Val stared at a group of girls, each one of them staring into their cell phones. What a one-track mind. As I was about to take a bite of my cake, I locked eyes with a guy who was staring right at me from across the street. He was tall with short black hair. He wore jeans and a ratty, once white t-shirt. His eyes were a piercing green that unsettled me. Something about him made me pause. He seemed familiar. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered the wildling that attacked me the day Tello died. But it was impossible. He couldn't be here. Besides, that wildling's face had appeared different that night, untamed, and with glowing eyes that promised brutality. This guy's face was familiar in some of its features, but it was thoughtful and civilized. Still, something about him made me uneasy. I elbowed Val and mumbled from behind my cake. Across the street, in the dirty t-shirt. His gaze flicked toward the guy. His brow started to furrow, but a shrill scream rent the atmosphere, making us forget all about the guy. Several initiates, including Val, jumped into action, responding to our duty of protecting Lux City, the way we were trained to do. I cursed, gave a longing glance toward my untouched honey cake, and threw it down. I turned to follow Val when an arm wrapped around my middle and pulled me back into the dark between the two buildings behind me. Chapter 5. I fought to get free, but whatever or whoever had grabbed me was too strong and had pulled me well away from the street. My boots scraped against the cobblestones as I kicked and bucked. I could have cried out, but my only thought was to fight and keep everything else away from danger. I bucked again, throwing my head back this time. It connected with something. There was a grunt and I was released. Spinning around, I went for my sword, but someone else sprang from the shadows and put me in a chokehold. A hot whisper brushed past my ear, but I didn't understand it. A wildling word, I was sure of it. I fought harder. Something pricked my neck and numbness spread over my body like a wave of warm water washing over me. My arms and legs only twitched a little as I fought to move them. A wildling stood in front of me. He was dressed in jeans and a long-sleeve shirt, but the blue glow of his eyes let me know his true nature. He was a wolf in pants. I wondered where he'd put his tail. He'd probably slicked it between his legs with the same greasy stuff that was on his black hair. The guy was massive, at least 6'5". I tried to cry out then, but my throat was stuck, as if I'd tried to swallow 10 honey cakes at once. But I couldn't be that lucky. Instead, I'd been pricked with the witch wildling immobilizing serum, something the witch covens made and shared with the packs. Even my breaths were labored. They taught us about it in class and explained its effects, but being told about a thing was far different from meeting it firsthand. This was bad. I'd been turned into a helpless bag of potatoes. The effects of the stuff could last for over an hour. It was more than enough time to disembowel me, like they'd done to Tello. If only my coda was complete, I would have some magic of my own to fight them. Instead, all I could do was watch, my eyelids frozen open. The sound of steps came from my left. Val! But when the figure drew closer, the shadows receding slightly from his face, I realized it wasn't Val. It was the guy that had been staring at me earlier. "Hello, Jazz," he said, his eyes flashing green with light from within. Lux. It was the guy that had attacked me in the forest. His face had turned feral again, and with the glow in his eyes, it was impossible not to recognize him. And how did he know my name? Duh. Stupid question, Jazz. Wolf wildlings, same as vampire wildlings, had abnormal hearing, so he must have picked it up from Val's lips. How long had they been watching me? I gave him a low, half-baked growl, which was all I could manage. He grinned crookedly. Of course he would. I didn't speak dog, so I'd probably said something like pork chop or big toe. I resolved not to growl again. But if he gave me back my words, I would fill his flea-infected ears with descriptions of his mangy mother. The other wildling, the massive one with the blue eyes, stepped closer. Suddenly, the chokehold loosened, and my feet came off the ground briefly as I was picked up and propped like a doll against the building. I started falling sideways, but my body hit an exposed pipe that ran up the wall and stopped. The wildling that had been holding me stepped into view. He appeared to be in his early 20s, just like the other two. He hadn't bothered with jeans and instead wore pack clothes in earth tones, leather pants, supple boots to match, and a sleeveless vest that showed his many tattoos. His eyes glowed yellow, and long honey-colored hair was pulled away from his face by a few well-placed small braids. He had thick eyebrows that met over his nose. As I leaned against the pipe like a forgotten broom, the three stood shoulder to shoulder, their glowing eyes scrutinizing me up and down. A triad. Wolf wildlings with no alpha. I swallowed. I was as good as dead. Chapter 6. We've been watching you, the green-eyed wildling said. But of course, you already know that. He moved closer and took my hand. I would have pulled it back and punched him straight in the snout if I'd been able to, but I could do little more than twitch my fingers. My name is Howl, he said. What was with the niceties? They'd blatantly poisoned me. There was no room for that. Cal pushed my sleeve up and examined my wrist, turning it this way and that. His thumb ran over my coda tattoo, sending a shiver up my arm. A smile spread across his lips. He turned his face to one side and gave his wildling friends a nod. The other two grinned. They were happy my coda wasn't complete, since that meant I didn't have magic yet. What did they intend? Kidnapping? I wouldn't be the first. Other Lux Academy students had been taken in the past. We knew that, though we didn't know why. Panic sizzled in my veins as I fought against the poison that bound me, but all I managed to do was make myself want to pee. I stopped fighting to safeguard my dignity. Let's do this, then, the blue-eyed wildling said, stepping forward and proceeding to remove my sword and coat. I tried to scream, but only a small humph came out. I swallowed hard, fear for what was about to happen clogging my chest. I was jostled about awkwardly. I slowly swiveled my gaze to one side. Blue Eyes was contorting me into a different coat. Wasn't the point undressing me? Not that I wanted these savages to go there, but what were they? Fashion critics? There was nothing wrong with my academy coat, except, well, the fact that it was so obviously an academy coat, black with a double row of silver buttons down the front. It dawned on me that they were putting me in a disguise so they could kidnap me. There was no stealthy way out of Lux City today. The streets were packed in all directions, and we were right in the middle of the celebration. It made no sense. Why take such a big risk? Whatever the answer, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that it wouldn't be easy for them to whisk me away. They'd have to go through a bunch of Academy students who were already on the alert. When Blue Eyes was done buttoning the plain coat that he'd stuffed me in, he threw me over his shoulder without ceremony. He was the biggest of the three and solid as a stone wall, so he lifted me as if I was a dry pelt. I hung down his back, arms dangling. A magistrate's robe had nothing on me. I could drape like the best of them. I pictured my butt up in the air. So much for safeguarding my dignity. The yellow-eyed savage crouched for a better look at me and winked. I gave him the best "die, wildling" stare I could conjure, though with my face as rigid as a door, I don't think I got my point across. Cal kicked my discarded jacket into a corner. "Let's go." He started out of the alley. Still crouching, Yellow Eyes began to tremble. "That's right. Be afraid, wildling. You're about to die." No one came into our city and kidnapped our residents, much less a Lux Academy initiate. He trembled faster and became a blur. Oh, no, he wasn't trembling from fear. I was seeing things. It had to be all the blood rushing to my head. Or the poison. Now he was just a smudge, like an abstract painting. Holy light! He must be shifting. I didn't want to see that. It was a gruesome sight with clothes ripping to reveal all the bits, joints popping out of place and jutting out at wrong angles, bare jawbones and tailbones ripping through skin and spraying out blood. My gut twisted. Ugh. Except none of that happened. What I actually saw, or what I thought I saw, was the undefined smudge of a human shape smoothly turning into a tawny wolf with eyes the color of a yellow summer moon and edges as sharp as anyone else's. The transformation was swift and graceful. Graceful? Really, Jazz? No, it was a lie. Our teachers at the academy had taught us about the gruesome affair of shifting. We had entire textbooks that explained it and showed bloody illustrations that made me want to puke. It was an illusion of some kind. Maybe it was that poison. Or maybe they'd brought a witch wildling with them and she was hiding somewhere, casting a spell. Our teachers said shifter skews the world over fooled everyone with different tricks. They hid their true, hideous nature. The wolf took a few steps and brought his snout close to my face. I tried to push back, afraid to lose my nose, but it was useless. He sniffed me like a piece of meat, then licked me. I would have gagged if most of my body wasn't paralyzed. The beast seemed to smile, baring his teeth and crinkling his yellow eyes. Stupid dog. After slobbering all over my face, I watched his upside-down shape trot toward the end of the alley. He leaped onto a metal staircase and climbed, bounding so fast between levels that I soon lost sight of him. Not a wolf. Nope, an oversized squirrel. As soon as the wolf disappeared, Blue Eyes exited the alley. I stared at his boat-sized, battered shoes as they tapped against the cobblestones. The sweets I'd eaten swayed from side to side inside my stomach. As awful as it would be, I wished I could vomit down his pants leg. That would show him not to kidnap people. He stopped at the alley's entrance. I swayed a few times before I stopped. Then we were on the move again, this time on the sidewalk. I knew because the cobblestones were polished to a shine by constant foot traffic, and because I could see several pairs of legs passing by. The din of agitated conversation filled my ears. She said she saw a wildling. By Lux. Here in the city? How dare they? I hope they catch them. I hope they skin it. You idiots! Stop gossiping and pay attention! I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, but only unintelligible grunts came out. Here were 2 wildlings passing right beside them, and all they could do was tittle-tattle. Val, where are you? Help me. Howl walked next to Blue Eyes and me, his stride confident. We got to the end of the block with no one barely noticing the abducting savages. They turned left, away from the city's center. If they managed to move a few more blocks in that direction, I was done for. We've lost him, a familiar voice said. Brandon? My eyes swiveled in their sockets like suds going down a drain as I tried to spot him. He was an initiate in my year. He would recognize me. I tried to call out, but only more grunts came out. I sounded like a drunk and probably looked like one. I was hanging off someone's shoulder for Lux's sake. This was how the last night of indulgence ended for many people. It couldn't have gone far, someone else responded. Val, I spotted his boots. They had a scuff he always complained about. He was facing away from me. Val, Val, Val. Grunt, grunt, grunt. I projected myself toward him, the way Magistrate Magnus was teaching us to do. I didn't have any magic yet, but my mind was the only thing working properly, and I was desperate. Of course, my attempt had no effect. As we hurried away, I was able to twist my head a fraction and could see more of my friend. I grunted some more. Blue Eyes pinched my butt in warning. Animal. Val began to turn. Oh, Lux, his profile had never looked so magnificent. Just as our gazes were about to meet, a deep howl sounded the way we'd come. That way, Brandon cried out. Boots slapped the cobblestones as Lux City's protectors charged toward the sound. Yellow Eyes. His job was to distract everyone while they stole me. Why me? Val turned away, his head snapping in the opposite direction. He rushed after the others. No! The word projected out of me, charged with all my will. I felt it whoosh forward, passing through me like a lightning bolt. Val stopped and stood there without moving a muscle, his back to me. Turn, turn, turn. Howl and Blue Eyes picked up their pace. All at once, Val's head whipped back, his steel eyes dark as night. Stop right there, he ordered, his voice thundering down the street with the authority of a magistrate and not a simple initiate. Thank the light. I was saved. Chapter 7. Blue Eyes didn't stop, but Howl did. I saw nothing but his legs as I bounced against my captor's back. I was not saved. After all, if anything, I'd just gotten Val killed. He might have sounded as commanding as a magistrate, but he wasn't one, which meant he had no hope of defeating a wolf wildling. The zing of his sword coming out of its scabbard reached my ears. Val should run, but the stubborn idiot was planting his feet to fight. One of my hands bent slowly into a claw. I was regaining some of my mobility, but the puny attempt only served to mock me. I couldn't do anything to get free, to help Val. Without warning, Blue Eyes came to an abrupt stop. My nose smashed against his back, filling my head with the scent of pine, wood smoke, and sweat. You made a big mistake coming to Lux City. A voice boomed through the street. echoing as if 1,000 men were speaking at the same time. If I didn't know better, I might have believed a platoon of magistrates had arrived, but I recognized it for what it was: magic thrust. Relief washed over me. I was truly saved now. Magistrate Candor was here. I'd heard his booming voice more times than I cared to remember during drilling exercises, and aside from Magistrate Magnus, there was no one else I'd choose to come to my rescue. Blue Eyes cursed. "Serves you right, wildling. Prepare to fry." As if I were a sack of potatoes, Blue Eyes dropped me on the sidewalk. I landed on my shoulder, jamming it so hard that the pain made my eyes roll back. Chaos blitzed around me. There were shouts and the sound of running steps. The whoosh of magic followed along with its sour smell. I forced my eyes open. The pain had brought on involuntary tears, and they clouded my vision. A red flash of light flew overhead, and the wildling fell to his knees next to me. At first, I thought he was hit, but that assumption flew out of my head when he pulled me to a sitting position and pressed a knife to my throat. "My weapon is sharp," he growled. "A little slip of my hand, and she'll die." Wait! What happened to kidnapping me? That was far better than killing me. My heart climbed into my throat. I couldn't die, not when I was so close to becoming an apprentice, not at the hands of a wildling, and with no chance of defending myself. "Coward!" The voice was but a rasp in the back of my throat, but Blue Eyes heard it. The quick flick of his gaze in my direction let me know. A growl rumbled to my left. I strained to see and caught sight of 2 glowing green eyes. Call had shifted and stood in his animal form, teeth bared, snout pointing in Magistrate Candor's direction. The wolf's pelt was as pristine white as his soul was black. My teacher stood in the middle of the street, his robe fluttering behind him as a fiery sphere of magic twirled in his outstretched hand. "Stay where you are," Blue Eyes shouted over his shoulder. "Do as he says, Valentine," Magistrate Candor warned. I couldn't see what was behind us, but I could imagine Val inching closer, taking unnecessary risks, when he should just leave this to the experts. There was a knife at my jugular, and we all knew how wildlings liked to keep their knives able to split hairs. If I get killed because of you, Val, I'll haunt your... "Let the initiate go, and I won't harm you," Magistrate Candor said. Blue Eyes laughed. "You know we're past believing your lies, denizen." "I'm not lying. You have my word," Magistrate Candor said. "A word as rotten as your city." Call took a few steps forward. The savage probably thought he could sneak up on him, but Magistrate Candor never missed a thing. I knew from experience. "We are at an impasse, then," Magistrate Candor said, "and I'm afraid neither one of you will get out of Lux City alive." As he said these words, the sphere of fire in his hand doubled in size. Blue Eyes' hold tightened, ready for the kill. I swallowed, my throat bobbing against the blade. "I'm sorry," Blue Eyes whispered in my ear, his hot breath sending a chill down my spine. I closed my eyes, preparing to die. "We tried," he said with regret. Holding my breath, I waited for the deadly slicing motion. It didn't come. Instead, I was released and hit the ground once more. My shoulder screamed in pain, my eyes sprang open. A blue-eyed wolf hovered over me, huge fangs bared, pointed ears leaning back. He seemed to nod at his packmate, then they both leaped in unison and charged Magistrate Candor. The fire orb flew from the magistrate's hand, quickly followed by a second one. The wolves weaved paths, then leaped up in the air at the last moment. Magic exploded against the street, sending pieces of stone flying up in the air and narrowly missing the wildlings. They kept running at full pelt, their claws scratching against stone, their snarls making me shudder. "Are you okay?" Val came up behind me, hooked his hands under my arms, and pulled me backward, further away from the melee. My feet dragged after me. I peered past my boots, heart in my throat. Magistrate Candor didn't attack again. Instead, he held his ground as the wolves got closer, running at leaps and bounds and zigzagging to make themselves difficult targets. Fire glowed in the magistrate's hands, the orbs growing larger and larger with each leap the wolves took. "Shoot! Shoot those—" If I could have shouted at my teacher, I would have. What was he waiting for? The wildlings were almost within leaping distance, and if he didn't attack, they would maul him. The magistrate finally pulled an arm back, ready to unleash his magic. "Yes, they're dead," Val said triumphantly, clearly as relieved as I was. Except my teacher, my role model of a lifetime, never got the chance to release his attack, because the third wolf, Yellow Eyes, lunged from behind, clamped his jaws around Magistrate Candor's neck, and pulled him to the ground. As they fell, the wolf jerked his head with vicious savagery. "No!" Val shouted and charged forward, holding up his sword. He ran at the wolves, but they were already darting away at full speed, their animalistic speed carrying them faster than any normal human was capable of running. Val came to a halt next to Magistrate Candor and hurled his sword at the retreating wildlings. I tried to claw my way in his direction, but the poison was still in my veins, making me weak. Pulling at his hair, Val fell to his knees in front of our teacher. He went to touch him, but in the last moment, snatched his hand back and covered his face. "Cowards! Filthy animals! First Tello and now Magistrate Candor. They would pay for this." Tears flowed freely, blurring the horrific scene and spilling down my face. Chapter 8. I was sitting limply with my back resting against the wall of an adjacent building when Magistrate Magnus and Magistrate Novus came running down the street, pushing past onlookers and ordering them to go home. Initiates who had been out celebrating and had tried to find the wolf when the woman shrieked now stood in a protective circle around my teacher's body. The magistrates strode toward the circle, their robes swaying from side to side as they went. I turned away and focused on bending my knee. I didn't want to see their expressions when they found their friend dead, mangled by the wildling. My knee remained stiff, but my toes wiggled inside my boot, tingling a bit as if waking up from a nap. Wildling poison. If only we could figure out something that made us resistant to it, or at least some sort of antidote to speed up recovery. "Initiate Bronte." I startled. My gaze snapped to a pair of boots and traveled up to find Magistrate Magnus standing in front of me. His face appeared to have turned a vomit shade of gray, but nothing else about his expression gave away the pain he must feel. "Initiate Valentine explained what happened. Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "Just the poison they gave me hasn't left my body yet. Other than that, I'm fine." He nodded once and crouched to examine me closer. "Did they say anything of import?" My head felt as if it were stuffed with cotton, and it was hard to remember exactly what had happened. What had they said? They seemed interested in my coda," I said, glad to come up with at least that bit of information. His mouth twitched ever so slightly, but quickly went back to normal. "May I?" He took my hand and pushed my sleeve back. He studied my tattoo much in the same way that Blue Eyes had. After turning my wrist in every direction, he placed his thumb on the gap that had yet to be filled. His fingernail was neat and large, its half-moon visible and perfectly white. Under it, my coda's opening seemed to disappear, and for a second, I imagined the last bit of the tattoo had been inked, and I'd become an apprentice. My life's dream. It was all I ever wanted, the reason I was one of the Academy's top students, both in intellectual subjects and physical ones. I worked hard for that. My peers thought my acceptance into an apprenticeship was guaranteed. Val and I talked all the time about our exploits as magistrates, canvassing the forest for wildlings, protecting our city from their evil. We'd spent many nights on top of our dorm's roof, staring at the stars, and imagining the dissemination of entire packs and covens at our hands. But my coda wasn't complete. Not yet. Magistrate Magnus had simply covered the gap with his finger and was now speaking a spell under his breath. I fought the urge to pull away. I didn't know what he was doing, but it wasn't my job to question him. So I endured a few silent beats until his lips stopped moving. He let go of my wrist and took a deep breath. Watching his face intently, I waited for him to say something. Except he didn't. The only hint that he'd learned something from my coda was a momentary tightening of his mouth. Disappointment? I couldn't tell. It came and went too fast. "I'm glad you're uninjured, Initiate Bronte," he said, surprising me. Magistrates never used our last names. A smile spread across my face. The fact that he'd used it was a sign of respect, practically a promise that I would soon be referred to as Apprentice Bronte, and after that, Magistrate Bronte. My heart skipped a beat from excitement, and I nearly jumped up and whooped like an idiot. Good thing the paralyzing poison wasn't completely gone. "I will ask Initiate Valentine and Magistrate Novus to take you back to the Academy," he said, stretching to his full height. He turned to leave, but before he did, I thought I caught sight of that disappointed expression again. My excitement plummeted to the pit of my stomach, and, for some reason that I couldn't understand, it slowly morphed into a dark premonition that something wasn't right. Not in the least. Chapter 9. By the time we were 200 yards away from Lux Academy's large iron gate, the wildling poison had left my body. Val and Magistrate Novus had carried me most of the way. It was only a 15-minute walk north from where we'd been, but I'd hated every second of it. And as soon as I felt strong enough, I asked them to put me down. Still, some other force was making my limbs feel just as heavy and useless. "Are you sure you're fine?" Val asked for the third time. I nodded. A lie. The Academy's stone portico stood tall and proud, the same as the rest of the structure, with its towers and battlements. It had been built over 300 years ago, and it had never been bridged, not even when wildlings were an infestation on the land. Several banners blew in the breeze, snapping against the dark sky. The luscious hill on which it was built was strewn with crabapple trees that, at the moment, bloomed with the delicate pink flowers that were common during springtime. Val sighed as I struggled to put one foot in front of the other. "Well, that was an eventful day of indulgence," he said. "Too bad those wildlings got away." Until now, he'd avoided the topic, but I could tell he was brimming with a million questions. He threw a surreptitious glance toward Magistrate Novus, who was walking several yards ahead of us. "The last day of indulgence for us," I said in a casual tone, trying to drive the conversation toward prevent us, because I didn't want to talk about what had happened. Not until I'd processed the jumble of feelings churning inside me. Especially this dark, heavy one that had been creeping toward my throat ever since we left Magistrate Magnus. "They'll snatch us at any moment." Val's voice trembled with nerves and excitement. "Good," I managed to distract him. "I'm so ready," he said. He was referring to the reaping, the Academy's tradition of unexpectedly separating the chosen initiates from the rest. Many times, the reaping had coincided with the last day of indulgence. What if that was the plan for this year? Maybe my subconscious knew something I didn't, and that was the reason for my jitters? Lux, we'd both worked so hard to earn an apprenticeship. Failure was simply not an option. "I wish they would just announce the chosen ones. I hate all the games," he complained. "At this point, they already know who they'll pick, but they just get off on making us suffer." Maybe because they suffered too, when it was their turn. Val shrugged. We crested the hill, and my legs practically sighed in relief. Ahead of us, Magistrate Novus hurried her pace and soon disappeared through the gate after exchanging a quick word with the guards on post. The light from the gas lamps on the walls cast flickering shadows on the ground and the guards' faces. Past the gate, the building's many windows shone with soft electric light. "Well, she's in a hurry," Val pointed out as the tails of the magistrate's robes billowed and quickly disappeared. We took a few more steps toward the gate, and, when we were a few paces away, I paused, that feeling in my throat growing, starting to suffocate me. Val glanced over his shoulder and frowned. "What is it? You're as pale as a vampire fang." "I am?" I asked dumbly, even though I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Come on, let's get you to bed. I'm sure a good night's sleep will help you get rid of any leftover poison still in your veins." Yeah, that had to be it. The poison was the reason I was feeling so weird. The reason this feeling of foreboding was crawling all over my skin. Everything would be fine, and tomorrow... Magistrate Novus reappeared at the gate, looking a bit panicked. "Initiate Bronte," she said, approaching me with tentative steps, as if she were afraid of me. What? Another magistrate using my surname? Val noticed, too, and his eyebrows rose almost to his hairline. "You look unwell," Novus said. "You should come in and rest." She beckoned with one hand, coming closer. When she reached me, a thin smile stretched her lips, and her hand wrapped gently around my elbow. "Come." I started moving again, but my steps were small and stiff. Val followed. Magistrate Novus kept smiling at me as she guided me past the gate. At some point, I thought I would scream from the pent-up anxiety in my chest. But then we strode past the guards, stepped inside, and the sweet scent of the blooming crabapple trees eased my nerves into oblivion. I was home. My shoulders relaxed, and I chided myself for acting like a fool. But the feeling of relief was short-lived, because Magistrate Novus suddenly stepped away from me, looking as if I'd grown fangs and furry ears. She lowered her head, looking as disappointed as Magistrate Magnus had. What's wrong?" I asked. Two hooded figures, reaping envoys, moved into the light from the shadows of one of the buildings and stepped in our path. My heart stopped. I'd been right. Tonight, the reaping began. Chapter 10. One of the hooded figures approached Val while the other one came toward me. Their faces were hidden behind black sheer fabric draping down the top of their hoods. Their flowing robes brushed the ground, and their long sleeves covered their hands. Absolutely no skin was visible. The apprentices, because they were the ones tasked with separating the chosen from the discarded, inclined their heads in silent salute. Val and I exchanged a glance. He seemed nervous, but the excitement and pride in his eyes were unmistakable. I stared at the ground, aware that the feelings crowding my chest were very different from his. Just hours ago, I would have shared his enthusiasm, but now something had changed, and I wasn't sure I'd be chosen. My envoy extended a hand to show me the path to follow. The fabric of his robe swayed, nearly hypnotizing me. My heart hammered as I wondered if Val would be asked to follow the same path. Full of apprehension, I glanced sideways and almost collapsed in relief when Val was instructed to go in the same direction. He winked at me, a toothy grin lighting up his features. We walked toward the apprentices' dormitories, where our new quarters would be located. Magistrates resided in the main building, which stood to our left, ancient and majestic, with its carved columns and massive towers at each corner. Their windows glowed warmly with the magistrates keeping to their private rooms on a night they weren't allowed to enjoy. Since they'd become apprentices themselves, their only comforts had consisted of teaching, killing wildlings, and keeping everyone safe. A pang of regret hit me. Too much sleep, too much food, too much alcohol, and any number of things would be forbidden from tonight on. Protecting Lux City would be my sacred priority, and anything that got in the way of my task would be considered a sin. For the first time ever, I regretted the fact that I would never have sex. I would be a virgin until the day I died. Yvetta, one of the apprentices assigned to our training, said it was the thing she missed the most, more than pistachio pastries, spiked coffee, and lazy naps on Sunday afternoon. I'd never had the chance to sleep with a man, and the closest I'd come to a kiss was today in the alley with that multi-tentacled girl whose name was already fading from my memory. Would I regret it? Was it better not to know what I would be missing? Or worse, to miss the impossible ideals my mind would come up with? I shook my head. Those thoughts were useless now. I'd made it. I'd gotten my heart's desire. I'd been chosen. Excitement and joy should have flooded me, but the same dread still clung to my heart, like a tick to a wolf wildling. My envoy stopped and pointed to the right of our path, away from the dormitories. My panic redoubled. Had I really just been worried about never having sex? What if taking the path to the right meant I had to leave the academy? Behind me, Val frowned, looking as worried as I felt. I swallowed and took my first step onto the forking path. Next to me, the envoy was as silent as an apparition. I couldn't even feel him breathe. Stealing glances over my shoulder, I waited until Val came to the same fork in the path. When he did, his envoy didn't stop and, instead, walked straight toward the dormitories. No. Val seemed to hesitate at the crossroads, as if he were on the verge of calling my name or asking why we were going in different directions. For an instant, a deeper question shaped his expression. Was he the one chosen? He lowered his head and, with one last glance of despair toward me, followed his assigned path. Every step took us further apart from each other. He would stay, and I would go. There was no doubt in my heart. At least I would get to see him one last time. Chapter 11. I tugged at my lavender gown, then ran a hand over the brown wig I'd been ordered to wear. If I had been chosen, I would be wearing a new uniform, and the length of my hair wouldn't matter. And this lipstick and blush would have never touched my face. What the male patriarchy kind of was this? It made no sense. I'd never known they made the rejected initiates do this. They didn't allow the younger students to witness their dismissal. Val and I got in trouble once for trying to sneak out of our dorm to spy, but we'd been caught and punished with toilet cleaning duty for a month. I never imagined this humiliation. I would rather clean toilets and horse for an entire year over looking like a powdered doll. Why? Why were they doing this? The question roared in my head over and over, even though I suspected the answer. It was a lesson, just like everything else we'd done under this roof. No time was ever wasted without imparting a kernel of knowledge or practicality. This was a reminder of how we should dress when they put us out on the street. I was supposed to let my hair grow so I could look like a proper girl. Screw that! I was never doing it. Standing in line, waiting to go into the dining hall, I fought the urge to cry out and ask why Jasmine Bronte, one of the top initiates at the academy, hadn't been chosen. Why had they turned her into a clown? But I couldn't scream. Since the beginning, the magistrates told us being chosen wasn't a guarantee for anyone. They warned us never to assume we would become apprentices, and to be prepared to live our lives outside of the academy, to think of what we would like our future to be and plan accordingly. We each had a magistrate-approved outline for an existence beyond Lux Academy. They would pay for my choice of college and give me enough money to get me to graduation. Here I had received an outstanding education. I could get into the university of my choice as long as it was in Lux City. They wouldn't waste money on anyone not planning to live on our land. You could leave if you wanted to, but who would choose to live in cities where all manner of skews roamed the streets, where vampires, werewolves, and witches were allowed to live in their twisted ways, where a normal human was called stale as if there was something wrong with them? Stale. That was what I would be in their eyes, and, ironically, it seemed to fit. I already felt myself hardening, losing my zest for life. In the despised life of my outline, a 20-minute jotting down of careless prospects, I was to be an engineer. I was good at math, and my teachers thought it was an excellent choice. But I didn't want to be an engineer or anything other than a magistrate. I knew nothing about living beyond these walls. I had no one to go to. My only family was Val. I would lose Val, too. I bit my tongue to stifle my tears. The line began moving. I stepped forward, my dress swishing. I was at the very back and could see exactly how long the line was. The tall carved doors that led into the dining hall were 50 yards away, and there were many bodies in the intervening distance, more than half of us removed from our dreams. There were a few quiet sniffles, but we all kept our composure, despite the fact this would be our last meal in our beloved academy. We had been taught dignity, and we would keep it. The boy in front of me wore a gray suit and a tie. We were never close friends, but I knew his name, Jonas Scintilla. I wondered what plans he had drawn out for his future. What mundane task would occupy most of the hours of the rest of his life? At last I made it to the door and entered the wide and long dining hall. The normally austere place was decorated with flowers, candelabra, and crimson curtains lining the windows. The tables were arranged in one long line, draped with embroidered white linens, and topped with gold-trimmed porcelain plates, silver utensils, and crystal glasses. Did the Academy own all these things? I'd never seen such luxury here. We normally ate from sectioned trays and drank from plastic cups. The Chosen stood on the other side of the table, mingling and looking resplendent in their new uniforms, which were navy, with a wide red belt and shoulder bars that marked them as apprentices. My eyes roved the room until I spotted Val. He was reclining against the wall next to a window, his attention devoted entirely to me. My heart stopped. Chapter 12. Val's expression was stoic and told me nothing. I looked away. Our lives were apart now, their paths diverging greatly from each other. "You will notice name cards on the table. Find your places, please," Magistrate Magnus said from the head of the table. Name cards? They wouldn't at least let us sit where we wanted. Why? As if in answer, Magistrate Magnus said, "The apprentices have selected their sitting partners." The apprentices. My gaze snapped to Val's. He walked to the back of one of the chairs around the middle of the long table. In invitation, he inclined his head toward the seat directly across from his. As if I were one of the idiot city girls, I felt a blush heating my cheeks. Again, I found myself staring at the polished wood floor, cursing inwardly. One day without my uniform, and I'd lost all my confidence. I didn't know who I was anymore. Me. I shuffled behind the others as they searched for their seats. A moment later, I stood in front of Val, my hands clutching the back of the chair as if someone would try to steal it from me. A small piece of paper folded like a tent sat on my plate, my name scrawled in Val's elegant handwriting. "After you," he said, gesturing toward the chair. I almost burst out laughing. Val always beat me to the table and had cheeks as fat as a chipmunk's before I settled down on my own spot. Pressing my lips into a thin line, I managed to keep my expression neutral. Chairs scraped back. Dresses and suits rustled as everyone took their seats. I draped the napkin across my lap and picked up the name card. Surreptitiously, I palmed it and brought it under the table. I would keep it forever. "For many of you," Magistrate Magnus said, "yesterday was your last day of indulgence. You'll be delighted to find out that this is your last night of indulgence." He chuckled as the new apprentices clapped in mock delight. No one had ever mentioned a last night of indulgence, but it was no surprise. The Academy kept all the details pertaining to the reaping well under wraps. "You look very nice," Val said, his steel blue eyes wavering slightly. "Thank you," I said, feeling as if I was talking to a stranger. "A wig, though?" There was the hint of a smile in his tone. I examined his face and realized he was trying not to laugh. "They forced me," I said. "Threatened to glue it to my head." His eyes widened for a moment, until he realized I was joking. He burst out laughing, a genuine sound that seemed to dash across the room, breaking the ice for everyone. Conversation started in force then, and soon the dining hall felt as it always had, full of camaraderie and good humor. "You look nice, too," I said, admiring Val's wide shoulders and spotless suit. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. Eyes darting left and right, he leaned forward and spoke in a whisper. "I don't understand what happened. You should be on this side." I shook my head to tell him he should stop. I didn't want him to feel sorry for me. Whatever reason the magistrates had to leave me out must be a good one. They didn't make mistakes. They always picked the best, and the fact that Lux City was safe from the wildlings was proof enough. "Do you know who your mentor is?" I asked, trying to divert the conversation in a different direction. Val leaned back in his chair and mumbled a name that sounded suspiciously like Magistrate Magnus. At first I wasn't sure that was who he meant, but the way he fidgeted in his seat let me know I'd heard him right. "Congratulations," I said, managing to keep my voice steady and free of jealousy. It wasn't his fault I'd somehow managed to get myself kicked out. I only wished I knew where I'd gone wrong. Though knowing may only serve as torture later on, there was no turning back the clock. "It should be you, not me," Val said in another whisper. I assumed he was talking quietly because the apprentices had been instructed not to bring up the subject. It made sense. How many of us were upset, confused? No matter how many times they'd told us anyone could be cut in the end. As if to prove my point, a chair scraped the floor, and a guy on my side of the table stood abruptly. "Why, Magistrate Magnus? Why didn't you pick me?" It was Nicholas Seller. He hadn't been one of the best initiates, but not worse than many of those across from us. 2 guards peeled away from the wall and approached him. One of them leaned forward and spoke to Nicholas in an inaudible whisper. He trembled with ill-contained anger, but by degrees he calmed down. They were probably threatening to kick him out if he didn't behave, and I was sure he didn't want to lose the last minutes to enjoy the only place he ever truly knew. At last, he nodded and sat back down, looking embarrassed. Everyone remained quiet for a long moment, but soon conversation restarted. Dinner was served, fancy, rich food like I'd never seen in this hall. I made sure to enjoy every bite, to tell myself it had been worth it. Everything I'd learned, all the people I'd met, all the friendships that would endure. I wouldn't get to see Val nearly as much as I did now, but every once in a while we would get together and it would be like old times. A delicious blackberry tart bathed in creamy sauce was our dessert, and managed, for a glorious instant, to make me forget about my uncertain future. After dessert, several servants entered carrying glass decanters of what looked like red wine. One of them caught my eye, a young boy of about 14 who had started working here only 2 weeks ago. He'd missed the top button of his servant's gray jacket and looked as nervous as a trapped rabbit. He walked toward our side of the table and started pouring wine. Before he was done filling the glass, the senior server, Venanzio, appeared out of nowhere and pulled on his arm, causing the boy's decanter to knock the glass down. Wine spilled everywhere, staining the tablecloth. Venanzio growled, "Look at what you've done now." He grabbed the boy's arm and gave him a push toward the door. The boy turned bright red as he left in a hurry. "My apologies," Venanzio said, cleaning up the mess with extra cloth napkins, his sunken eyes flashing in Magistrate Magnus's direction as he bowed deeply. I frowned. That must be some expensive wine for Venanzio to be so upset. Still bowing, he took a decanter from the next boy, began pouring wine himself, and ordered someone else to serve the new apprentices. Now I was confused. I'd never seen him serve anyone but the magistrates and apprentices. I imagined the pressure was on since he wasn't used to fancy dinners like this. When he got to me, his hand trembled slightly as he filled my glass. So unlike Venanzio. We always joked that his heart and nerves were made from the same meat as Thursday stew, so tough and stringy that not even our sharp swords could cut it. A pang hit me as I remembered I didn't have a sword anymore. They had taken it from me and would probably give it to some new initiate who wouldn't deserve it. Had 2 left feet and an empty brain behind his ears. No, I wasn't bitter. Not at all. When everyone's cups were filled, Magistrate Magnus stood and lifted his glass. It was filled with water, the only thing he ever drank. I picked up my wine and tipped it in his direction. Once a month, I'll get drunk in your name, Magistrate Magnus. Then for dinner, I'll eat all the pistachio pastries I want. And for dessert, I'll have sex. I had to resign myself to banalities, it seemed. I was about to take a gulp of the delicious-smelling wine when I remembered Venanzio's tight-lipped expression and the way his hand shook as he served me. Some awful foreboding climbed into my throat, same as last night as I'd approached the gate. I froze, the glass poised on my lower lip, the fermented scent of grapes snaking up my nose. "Don't drink it," a voice said inside my head. It was that same voice of reason that had saved me from trouble in the past. Feeling stupid, I pretended to take a sip, then set the glass down and licked my lips. Really good," Val said across from me. "I know, right?" Sean said to my right as he took a huge gulp. No more dessert or wine were served. Val casually propped his elbow on the table and smiled at something one of the apprentices said. His sleeve dropped, revealing his coda. It was complete. The entire room seemed to tip sideways. He noticed me staring and lowered his arm under the table, a slight smile of satisfaction on his face that he quickly stymied. He would have magic soon, and he would start training to use it. I grabbed the edge of the table as I thought of the gap in my tattoo. It would forever remain unfinished, a constant reminder of my failure. I glanced toward Magistrate Magnus and found that his attention was focused on me. He inclined his head, a hint of sadness in his expression. A server reached in front of me and removed my plate and silverware. My disappointment gave way to anger. "The last night of indulgence is the wrong name for this," I told Val, feeling spiteful. "It should be the first night of never again." I let out a forced laugh, imagining how I could grow to triple my size from eating desserts and drinking if I wanted to. Val smiled gently, understanding flashing in his expression. "We'll keep in touch, right?" For a moment, his eyes wavered, as if he would cry. I sobered up, let go of my animosity, and nodded. "Of course. I'll visit you the first chance I get." I'd never seen anyone visiting the apprentices or magistrates, but I would make sure not to let distance, envy, or rancor get in the way of our friendship. Dinner ended, and we were instructed to say goodbye to our friends. No hugs were allowed, not even handshakes. We had to stay on our side of the table while we waved meekly and retreated. My gaze never left Val's as we backed away. It was the doors to the hall that broke our connection as the guards closed them with a definite thud. I managed not to cry by holding on to my pride and the idea that I was now free. No celibacy or deprivations in my future. I could have it all. Except what I wanted most. I turned, got in line, this time I was in the middle, and filed down the hall the way we'd come. Everyone was quiet, their steps shuffling as if their shoes were leaden. What now, I wonder? I turned to Mary, who had ended up behind me. She didn't answer. Her expression was slack, and her eyes as blank as a sheet of paper in a new notebook. "Are you all right?" No answer. "What the—" The line continued moving, except we took a turn in the wrong direction. We weren't headed out of the building. We were walking deeper into it. Chapter 13. My skin crawled, and my heart beat frantically. Everyone was walking quietly and with synchronized steps. Panic stuck its claws into me, and the narrow corridor walls seemed to close in on me. I wanted to tear my stupid dress off and run in the opposite direction, but I didn't dare. There were guards stationed all along the corridor, watching our progress with care. As I passed the first one, I stared straight ahead, the way everyone else seemed to be doing. What's happening? I almost shouted out the question, but fear clogged my throat, and the answer came on its own anyway. The wine. There had been something in the wine that had put everyone in a trance. But not me, since I hadn't drunk it. But why? Why? I passed in front of a guard, sure that he would be able to see a twitch in my expression that would give me away, and something told me that wouldn't be a good thing. They would be angry if they found out I hadn't turned into a walking corpse, then I didn't want to find out what they would do to me. Something, that same premonition that had been nagging at me since last night, told me to pretend, to play along. But if I didn't do anything else, what then? The corridors were getting darker, and I was sure I'd never seen these passages, not in the 19 years I'd been at the academy. One of the students ahead of me stumbled out of line, blinking. It was Catherine. Her head swiveled from side to side. What? The guard closest to the girl grabbed her arm and pulled her away. I watched from the corner of my eye as a heavy wooden door opened and the guard shoved her inside. The door shut too fast for me to see anything besides the girl in her blue dress and the darkness beyond. I pressed my lips together, resolved not to say anything, fearing that the fate inside a dark room would be worse than whatever else waited down the corridor. "Lux, what is this? Where are they taking us?" The question rang in my head 1,000 times as we began our descent down a narrow stone staircase. Torches illuminated the way. The wonders of electricity hadn't made it here. The thin slippers I wore snagged on the rough steps. Fear trickled down my spine like drops of frigid water. I resisted the urge to hug myself and stifled a shiver. Strangely, the air around us grew warmer and warmer the deeper we went. The pits of hell. That was where they were taking us. We had broken some unspoken rule, committed some sin against the academy, and were now going to pay for it. Demons would peel the skin off our flesh and the meat off our bones. Then they would devour our souls, the way I devoured honey cakes. I could almost see the blood dripping down their pointed chins as if it were cherry syrup. After an eternity on the stairs as they spiraled down, we reached the bottom of the staircase and came out into a cavernous space that appeared bigger than the building above us. The heat redoubled, making it hard to breathe, filling my head with a drowsy haze. Trying to look ahead without being noticed, I leaned sideways by a fraction and caught sight of a dark pool of water reflecting the torchlight. Steam floated upward along with the smell of sulfur. A hot spring. Maybe the same one that provided the warm water we used for our baths. The magistrates always complained some of the initiates didn't bathe as often as they should. Was this their way of taking revenge? Maybe it was a joke, a final parting gift we would never forget. The line slowed down. I prayed to the light and all that was holy. Lux, help me. but somehow I knew there'd be no help. The Lux Academy served the light. If we were here, it was because the light wanted it so. I peeked again. Some of the students had abandoned the line and were now kneeling at the edge of the hot spring, doing something I couldn't make out. As I moved up, feet shuffling, I noticed a long table ahead. My peers were taking something from its surface and heading for the hot spring to kneel next to the others. When there were only 4 students ahead of me, I saw what they were grabbing. Daggers. Sharp weapons of all shapes and sizes lay in 3 neat rows. My heart redoubled its pace. I had no idea what they expected me to do with a dagger, but one thing was for sure: if it came to it, I would use it to escape. In front of me, Richard Clypeus stepped up to the table and took under a second to pick a dagger. Weapon in hand, he walked off toward the spring. Then it was my turn to face the array of weapons. A guard stood on the other side of the table, overseeing our progress. With a knot in my throat, I kept my focus on the daggers and quickly chose one that appeared to be the right size for my hand. Testing my grip on the handle, I went the way Richard had. I kept my steps short and my eyes fixed ahead while, through my peripheral vision, I desperately tried to capture every detail unfolding before me. For all intents and purposes, I was staring at the steam rising from the surface of the spring. But in reality, my attention was on the blurry images at the corners of my vision. The vigilant guards at regular intervals, my peers kneeling at the edge of the spring, and no exit other than the staircase behind us. I didn't dare glance back, but I suspected that way out had been barred. Was there another one in the dark depths of the cave? Loud thuds sounded in my ears, and it took me a moment to realize it was the drumming of my own heart. The urge to dash back up the staircase, screaming and brandishing the dagger, took hold of me, but I resisted. I had to bide my time until I knew exactly what was happening. Mimicking Richard, I knelt to his right, leaving no space between us, even though the others had. Eyes screwed shut, I waited for one of the guards to notice and say something. No one did. Slowly, I opened my eyes, my nose twitching at the smell of sulfur and something else. With my back to the guards and nothing but the spring in front of me, my gaze snapped sideways. "Richard!" I almost cried out his name, but bit my tongue. He was bent over, his arms submerged in the spring up to his elbows, the sleeves of his jacket sucking up the water as he just knelt there, swaying ever so slightly with the current. "What's going on?" I whispered, panic thrilling through my body. No response. He didn't even blink. I tightened my grip around the dagger, leaned forward, and stuck my arms in the water, imitating him. The steam tickled my nose, and the warmth of the water kissed my face. I felt stupid, wondering about the point of all this. Someone knelt a couple of paces to my right, startling me. My gaze snapped in that direction. It was Mary, and she was unceremoniously lifting the dagger to her wrist. "What are—" I began to whisper, then was struck mute as she made a deep cut, and blood poured out in a thick stream. My spine turned to ice, and it took all of my strength not to scream in horror. As her blood gushed from the wound and splashed into the spring, no pain registered in Mary's face. Her expression remained a blank canvas, where before there had been joy, worry, hope, and so much more. Mechanically, she leaned forward and stuck her arms into the spring, washing away the blood and creating a tiny crimson river in its clear depths. Chapter 14. Oh, Lux, what is this? Numbly, I pretended to slice my wrist open, then quickly stuck my arms in the water. My skin rippled with a chill as the warmth penetrated my bones. Tears gathered, threatening to spill. My chest hurt with the betrayal. They were killing us. They'd lied. There would be no life for us outside of the academy. They'd make us craft plans for a future that was never meant to come true. Magistrate Magnus's trustworthy face appeared before me, his firm voice echoing with words about honor and duty. Did he know about this? Did Novus and Exalto and Salus know? Of course they know. Nothing happened in the academy without their knowledge. But why? Why? Richard leaned forward precariously, his nose nearly touching the surface of the water. A splash echoed through the hollow space, followed by another and another. A moment later, Richard fell face first into the spring, sending hot water splashing onto my bare shoulders and neck. Mary followed, and I knew I had no other choice but to continue the charade, even at the risk of drowning. The academy was using a potion to make us commit suicide. The magistrates, our teachers, who consistently preached against tainted magical brews, had used one on their beloved students to make them commit the most heinous sin. The truth of this knowledge fought against my love for the academy. Even as my peers bled and drowned, I didn't want to believe that my only way out of this cave would be dead. Not knowing what else to do, I went limp and allowed myself to fall. As I hit the water, the wig came loose. Strands of fake hair wrapped over my eyes and under my nose. Panic caused my imagination to flare. They're coming for you, Jazz. I imagined hands on my shoulders, pulling back and flipping me over. Liar, we know you're alive. They stabbed me in the chest, 1, 2, 3, 10 times. Each stab is vicious and so real. I screamed. Bubbles exploded out of my mouth, bringing me back to my just as f***ed-up reality. My lungs screamed for oxygen. Any moment, I would push out of the water, gasping for air. Sneak in a breath. 1, just 1, do it. I was about to yank my head out of the water when 2 hands wrapped around my ankles and pulled. I turned to Rock and, like Rock, lay on the ground, my hand wrapped tightly around the dagger and my desperate need for oxygen forgotten for fear I'd been discovered. But whoever had pulled me out quickly moved on, and by the sounds of it, was working on getting Mary out too. Tremulously, I took in a silent breath, and it was all I could do not to get on all fours, gasping and coughing. I stared into Richard's pallid face through wet lashes. Under the dim torchlight, he practically looked gray with his dark hair plastered to his head and all the color gone from his cheeks and lips. I thanked the light for my darker complexion, and, for the first time in my life, I had reason not to begrudge the parents who had abandoned me, since they hadn't made me pale. But his white face was not the only difference between Richard and me. There was also a gaping wound at his wrist. I didn't have one, and didn't want one. A slight trickle of blood still slid out of Richard's wound and slowly formed a tiny puddle on the stone ground. Bit by bit, I moved my hand closer to his, while my senses remained in heightened alert, expecting the guard's approach at any moment. Gingerly, I pressed my wrist to the blood, smearing it against the stone. It wasn't much, but it would pass a cursory inspection. If they checked more closely, though... I swallowed and inched my arm back, keeping my wrist up and hoping the blood would dry quickly. There were a few splashes which told me my friends were still pitching face first into the spring. A knot began to form in my chest, growing tighter and bigger the more I stared at Richard's inert figure and imagined the other initiates' faces, rigid and drained of blood. "Coward," a voice echoed inside my head. "They're dying, and you just lie here." But what was bravery when all it could do was get you killed? There was nothing I could do to help my friends. They were in a trance, surrounded by guards whose job seemed to be ensuring no one deviated from the script. "And if you manage to get out of here alive, what will your existence be without honor?" the same voice asked. "Nothing. My life would be nothing. There was no way I'd be able to go on, knowing I hadn't helped my friends. But what could I do? I would die all the same, no matter what. Whether bleeding myself dry into a hot spring, being cut to pieces when my charade was discovered, or fighting, dagger in hand, while I screamed my rage and disappointment toward the Academy and all their lies. Lies, lies, lies. Everything they had ever promised us had been lies. They told us there would be happiness after rejection, that failing was no reason to lose hope, that we would come to love our alternate paths. Except all they gave us in exchange for all our years of hard work and devotion was a disgraceful death. Was it always this way? Year after year? Or were we the first? The last, the exception? What would all those lucky enough to be chosen think happened to us? Or did they already know? Had they been told as part of a final test to become apprentices? No, I refused to believe that. Val would never. The smile of satisfaction when I noticed his completed coda flashed before my eyes. Lux helped me. Minutes passed, and despite the warmth from the spring, cold seeped into my bones. "The last one of them is dead," one of the guards announced, his voice echoing through the cave. "Bring the carts, then," a more commanding voice that I recognized said. It was Captain Silex, the head of the guard, the woman who had guided our weapons drills, the woman we had, at times, looked up to as a mother, a protector. She had watched us die, and now she was sending for the carts. My faith in everything I'd ever known crumbled. Chapter 15. The rhythmic sound of hooves and wooden wheels clattered against the rocky ground, echoes bouncing off the walls. How had they gotten horses and carts in here? There was only one way. There was an exit at ground level. I listened intently, not moving a muscle. The realization hit me. I would die like the coward I was. All the training, all the drills and lessons had done nothing to make me into a warrior. That was the reason I'd ended up here, lying on the cold stone, wet and terrified that my next breath would give me away and be my last. The reason I did nothing when 2 guards grabbed me by my feet and shoulders, swung me onto a wooden cart, and dumped me on a pile of freezing corpses. I landed on top of one of my friends, my face plastered against their damp chest. Who was it? Who lay dead under me, betrayed, treated like a piece of garbage? Wet, cold limbs rubbed against my bare arms. My right arm had landed on someone's face, and I didn't dare move it. Another corpse landed on top of me, then another, knocking the air out of my lungs, making it whoosh through my half-opened mouth. I waited in horror, sure the guards had heard me, but they only added another corpse to the pile. The trance hadn't killed me, but suffocation would. One way or another, I would die tonight. The cart began to roll, clattering and rocking on the uneven stones. The bodies that surrounded me settled, falling into place and growing more rigid and cold. I struggled to breathe as the pressure against my ribs redoubled. The metallic scent of blood filled my head. My stomach clenched, and the dinner they'd served us climbed to my throat. My world shrank to the place where frigid skin touched my naked arms and legs. My friends were dead, and now they were nothing but potential toys for necromancers and dark mages, meals for wildlings, wolves or otherwise. And I was trapped with them, by them, lost in the darkness because their light was gone forever. A scream built up in my chest. I fought and fought to suppress it, but only the vomit burning my throat managed to hold it down. The cart rolled on. My head began to itch as if bugs were crawling and weaving paths through my cropped hair. In my desperation, I lost track of time and had no idea how long it took for the cart to stop moving. It could have been an hour or 2 or 3, and it seemed impossible that no one had discovered me, because I was sure I'd screamed at some point. But maybe the darkness had swallowed that too, the way it was swallowing my sanity. Suddenly the world tipped, and I tumbled and tumbled, rolling against earth and corpses and earth. My limbs jostled and bumped. I thought I might break something, but I rolled to a stop, mercifully unscathed, if being tossed like refuse in the company of worm food could be called that. I looked around through half-lidded eyes. I'd landed on my back and could see the night sky above. Thousands of beautiful stars pierced the velvet of the night, irony mocking my misery. Dirt walls rose around me. I was in a pit, a mass grave, about to be buried alive. Bodies rolled down the side of one wall. Bones cracked. Dirt sprayed into the air, pelting my face and going into my eyes. I blinked and turned my face away, trusting no one would notice any movement at the base of a dark hole with corpses tumbling right and left. A set of guards swung bodies from their arms and legs, chucked them into the pit, then disappeared to fetch another one. When they did, I squirmed my way to the top of the pile, slowly moving closer to the opposite edge. As the pile of cadavers grew under me, I got closer and closer to the edge. I took turns between playing dead and shifting the bodies that fell on top of me. Soon they would run out of bodies. And then... The thought of being buried alive sent a jolt of terror straight into my chest. I had to get out of here, now. Maybe it would be smarter to stay put and then dig myself out once the guards were gone, but I couldn't do it. There was no way I'd be able to remain still while they shoveled dirt onto my face. So when they went back for another body, I rolled onto my stomach and desperately crawled over a girl in a light-colored dress. My slippers came off as I slid in the muddy dirt. When I reached the edge, I stood on her chest, dug clawed fingers into the dirt, and pulled myself up. On shaking legs, I stretched to my full height. The pit was deep enough that I could barely touch the edge with my arms outstretched and my toes digging into the dead flesh of my once-living stepstool. Ironically, one of the skills the Academy had insisted I learn, rock climbing, served me well and kicked in by instinct. Despite my cumbersome dress, I swiftly pulled my way to the edge and peeked over it. To my surprise and relief, no one was in sight. Maybe they were retrieving the shovels or taking a smoke break. Either way, it was invitation enough for me. I'd been taught to take my chances if and when they came. Wildlings didn't hesitate when confronted with their enemies. They attacked and killed and didn't even ask questions later. Heart lodged in my throat, I scrambled out of the pit and, hitching up my dress, I ran. With no idea of where I was, I turned in the opposite direction of the carts and pumped my legs as fast as I could. My entire body felt leaden, like I was in one of those dreams where the air around me turned to honey, and I became the slowest person in the world. About 100 yards to my right, a line of trees stood dark against the deep blue sky. I veered in that direction, stumbling, and throwing desperate glances over my shoulder. I could have never imagined myself running toward the woods, and much less at night, but here I was, praying to the light to let me get there unnoticed. But maybe I was praying to the wrong thing, because just as I finished my plea, a shout broke through the night. "Hey!" Then another voice. "One is getting away!" The cry was desperate, ringing with fear. I ran faster, my bare feet crashing over rocks and broken branches. A question flew into my head, but it was quickly forgotten. Why should they be afraid when I was the one running for my life? Chapter 16. I jumped over a fallen log and pressed forward, my own breaths sounding like a storm in my ears. Sweat dripped into my eyes. I swatted it away and with my other hand pushed branches out of the way. My dress fell to my feet, tangling with the brush. I staggered back and fumbled with the useless fabric. Pulling, I tore off half of my skirts and kept running. Just a little more. If I broke past the tree line, I would be free. "Stop!" someone yelled behind me. I dared a glance back. Several guards ran at full pelt, gaining quickly. It took but minutes for the sounds of pursuit to reach me. They had dogs with them, dogs whose senses I would never be able to fool. My hope died. I trampled through the brush, heedless of the pain in my feet. My soles felt raw, and I knew that if I looked down, I would discover ground meat instead of toes. Escape was impossible. I should have let myself drown, and my death would have been peaceful compared to this. The guards and their dogs sounded closer. I rounded a big tree and stopped, looking around for an unlikely escape. I saw nothing but more trees, nowhere to hide. An image of those wolves ripping Tello's body to pieces appeared before me. Wildlings roamed these woods, and I didn't want to die that way either. "There!" someone shouted, spotting me. "Let loose the dogs!" My legs gave out from fear. I held onto the tree and, glancing up, saw my only salvation in its branches. I climbed as fast as I could. My sweaty hands slipped several times, but somehow I managed to hold on, stopping only when the next branch appeared too thin to hold my weight. I pushed my back to the tree trunk and pulled my trembling legs into my chest, my face wet from involuntary tears. A second later, the dogs jumped at the tree, snarling and barking. They bounced away and came running at it again and again, sharp teeth flashing with something close to hunger. With every angry bark, my heart skipped a beat. They sounded as if they were right next to me, and I imagined I could smell their rotten breath. "Heel!" one of the guards ordered as he caught up with the beasts, but they paid him no mind. It took several more commands from a couple of other guards to get them to move aside and sit quietly. "Come down, girl," the first guard ordered, shining a flashlight through the branches. I would have spit on him if I wasn't so out of breath. Instead, I shot daggers at the lot of them. "These are the times when I wish they'd let us carry a gun," a second guard complained. "We'll get you down one way or the other, so you'd best make it easy on yourself," the first one said. I pressed tight fists into my eyes, and, next thing I knew, I was laughing, the full deranged sound that made me fear I was losing my mind. The guards stilled. Even the dogs seemed to stop their panting. "Make it easy on myself?" I asked, punctuating my words with a cackle. If we have to send for someone to make you come down, we will," the same guard threatened. Once more, I detected fear in his voice, a hesitation, a gentle waver in every word, despite his effort to sound commanding. Something seemed to break inside me. Perhaps it was my fear of death splitting into pieces and reshaping itself into resignation or insanity. Death would be better than this humiliation and all they'd put me through already. Slowly I pulled away from the tree trunk, crouched on the branch like a spider monkey, and stared down, counting heads. 6 guards had come after me. "Why so many of you?" I asked, swaying my arms from side to side and cocking my head to peer at them. Shadows made their faces into hollow masks, looking at their angry, twisting expression. I wondered if I'd imagined their fear. Their expressions spoke of nothing but darkness, not the light they were supposed to represent. Well, I'd been trained to face much worse, hadn't I? "Afraid of a girl?" I asked. "Oh, Jazz." Captain Silex stepped away from the shadows beyond the circle of light the flashlights created. "I should have guessed it was you. Always so resilient and stubborn." My breath caught. The captain was here. Every student who had died tonight had spent countless hours training with her, learning how to wield the sword and ride. How could she do this? She turned to someone. "You, go, and if we aren't back in 20 minutes, tell Magistrate Magnus what happened and bring him here." At the mention of the man I had so much admired, bile rose in my throat. "All of them." The guard she'd singled out nodded and marched away. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "We trusted you. We thought—" "It's the way it's always been," Captain Silex interrupted me. "And it goes beyond anything you could ever understand. Maybe if you hadn't failed, one day you might have been privy to the knowledge, but—" She finally bothered to look up. Her face held nothing of the kindness I was used to seeing. Instead, her expression was closed and determined, the way I imagined it would be when she faced wildlings. "I didn't fail," I said, as if that mattered, but it didn't. It was better that I would meet my end today, and I wouldn't continue to be part of the lies that must fester like maggots at the very foundation of the Academy. "There is a path and a way," Captain Silex said, as if she were some sort of preacher. "Keeping Lux City free of the wildlings and their darkness isn't easy, and sacrifices must be made. But like I said, you would never understand." "Murderers!" I spat, then said something unexpected. "I hope wildlings devour your entrails. I hope the light seeps out of you and darkness eats your worthless, lying souls." A couple of the guards held 2 fingers to the gap between their eyebrows, the sign of enlightenment and protection from the dark. "Witch," one of them said. I bared my teeth and growled. "Enough of this," Captain Silex said. "Get some rocks." My heart sped up, and I glanced around, wondering if there was a way for me to escape by leaping from tree to tree. Then I remembered I was resigned to die, though that didn't mean I should go down without a fight. A wicked smile tipped my lips, and I angled my body, aiming for one of the guards, and jumped. Chapter 17. I landed on the guard like a rock hurled from a catapult. Our bones clashed as if there was no meat on them. Groaning, we collapsed in a heap, then rolled away from each other. Pain lanced up my spine like a fiery sword cutting through me. By all the laws of physics, I should have stayed on the ground, but rage burned in my veins, giving me the strength to jump to my feet and face everyone, knees bent, hands held in front of me, ready to give them. My mud-streaked legs and bloody feet stuck out from under the torn dress. Captain Silex gave me a look of contempt and drew her sword. Her guards followed, stepping next to their leader. "Not a day has passed, and she's already a savage, you see," Captain Silex said, her mouth twisting in distaste. The guards nodded to themselves as if, up until this moment, they'd had reason to doubt why I'd failed to become an apprentice, why my death was necessary. The way they were staring at me, that mixture of fear and disgust, made me take a step back. Was there something broken inside of me that the magistrates had been able to see? Something dark and dormant that lived in my soul and needed to be eradicated? I had felt something while I was up the tree, that bit of insanity, then the recklessness that had made me jump. Was Captain Silex right? Was I a savage? I shook my head. No. They had done this to me. They had built me up, and then, in one night, they had torn me down. "How will you kill me?" I demanded. "Will you drown me? Bury me alive?" "We'll give you a choice," Captain Silex said in a tone that suggested she was doing me a favor. "You can choose to come peacefully, and your death will be painless. Otherwise—" She let the word hang, and the air became charged with the promise of torture. My insides trembled. How was this the same person I'd known for so long? How had she fooled me so thoroughly? But it didn't matter. All I knew was that peaceful was the opposite of what I would give them. "Go f*** yourselves," I spat and, rolling to one side, picked up 2 of the rocks the guards had collected. I threw one straight at Captain Silex's head. She easily dodged out of the way, but the rock hit one of her guards in the temple. He dropped, his entire body unhinged, and collapsed to the ground face first. The flashlight flew from his hand and the light spun, slicing and dicing the darkness, until the flashlight crashed to the ground and rolled away. Rage disfiguring her face, Captain Silex gestured toward the other guards. They began to move, slowly trying to form a circle around me. I jumped back, picked up more rocks, and surreptitiously judged the distance to the fallen guard and his sword. One after the other, I flung rocks at 2 of the guards. They dodged and came at me, but I was already rolling out of the way and toward the weapon. My hand was but an inch from the sword when Captain Silex kicked it out of reach. I finished my roll with nothing but a handful of grass and dirt and a tall, dry bush at my back. Captain Silex thrust her sword toward my gut. I stepped back, coming closer to the prickly bush. I had worked myself into a corner. Panic sank its fangs into me. "Captain Silex," one of the guards said, a wicked glint in his eyes. "I've heard that death by fire is one of the most painful. I think it would be very appropriate for a witch." "I am not a witch," I screamed. Was this what they were telling themselves to justify killing us? That we were like the wildlings? "Are you sure?" Captain Silex asked with a cold smile. The question was like a punch to the gut. What was she trying to tell me? I was an orphan, and the knowledge of my origins had come from the Academy. They'd told me that my family had been murdered by wildlings during one of their attacks on the small town where my parents lived. I was a baby when it happened and was found alone in my crib while my family lay dead outside. Vampires from a northern coven had ripped out their throats and drained them dry. My story was the same as all of my peers. Was it a lie like everything else? "Either way," the captain continued, "you will die like one of them all the same." I saw it in her eyes the moment she decided to kill me. I'd seen that expression during training too many times and, from experience, knew I didn't stand a chance. I braced myself for the killing blow, for her sword to pierce my gut. At least she'd found some mercy in her heart and decided to make it swift. A wild, blood-curdling cry made the captain twirl and point the sword in the opposite direction. "What was that?" 4 of the guards stood frozen, staring sideways at the dark woods. They held their swords in their shaking hands, looking as if they were about to pee their trousers. "Where is John?" Captain Silex demanded. None of the guards answered, but one pointed toward the woods where a thin branch was swaying from side to side. "What was it?" the captain asked. I inched to the side as quietly as I could. "What was it?" the captain repeated when the petrified guards didn't answer. When it came to wildlings, the guards had less experience and knowledge on how to deal with them than magistrates and even apprentices. They were meant to guard the school from regular enemies, not supernatural ones. I don't know," one of the guards finally said. "Maybe a wolf wildling. I think I saw a tail." By now, I had made it a fair distance away from the captain and had spotted a path through the trees. I was about to start running when a black shadow swooped behind the guards, snatched one of them, and dragged him into the woods as if he were nothing but a squirrel in the talons of a falcon. Seeing my chance, I darted for the woods, away from the academy and all its lies. Once more I found myself running through the trees, though this time it felt as if I were escaping from something much different. I didn't hear the captain and her guards following me, though I did hear their screams, and, some time later, the deep howl of a wolf. Chapter 18. Hissing, I stuck my injured foot in the river. I was sitting on a rock, shivering. The water was frigid, and I would only grow colder by sticking my feet in it, but the pain would grow numb. At least, I hoped so. If I got frostbite, good riddance. It couldn't hurt any worse than this. Even though it was spring, winter still raked its claws over the land overnight, reminding you that it wasn't really gone, just starting to go dormant, and it would be back soon enough. Not to mention that high in the mountains, in the place where the river was born, winter never really went to sleep. Hugging myself, my chin resting on bent knees, I watched the eddies twirl about my ankles, scrubbing away the mud and dry blood. After a few minutes, my toes grew numb, and it was a relief to get rid of the sting and burning from all the cuts I'd endured. I knew it would be worse when I took my feet out, but this numbness wasn't too bad. Maybe I would let it climb up my calves, my legs, my middle, and finally my brain, until I forgot what had happened. My stomach growled, adding insult to injury. I needed to find something to eat before my stomach alerted whatever wildlings claimed these woods as theirs. My only hope was to cross this land unnoticed until I reached the next civilized town, and from there, I would go to Augusta. I had no idea how long and far the academy would search for me, but putting as much distance as possible between me and Lux City seemed like the most sensible option. Fingers shaking, I tore the bottom of my gown into long strips and laid them to the side. Wincing, I pulled my feet out of the water and nearly whimpered in pain. After wrapping my feet, weaving the strips of fabric gingerly through my toes, I limped away from the river, wishing that it was summer, so I could believe in better chances of survival. I would have frozen last night, but I never stopped moving. Guided by the sun, I walked south, keeping my eyes open for any movement and anything that resembled food. From my training, I knew how to orient myself and the difference between what to eat and what would kill me by turning my insides to liquid. Birds chirped overhead, as if the world hadn't been leaped out of recognition. The sun rose, though not fast enough for my frozen bones. A bush with bright red berries caught my eye. I hobbled to it and examined it closely. The leaves were shaped like ovals with ragged edges, and the berries were dark and perfectly round. They looked like wild blueberries, or were they elderberries and poisonous? Did wild blueberries have leaves with ragged edges? Did they look this dark? Oh, Lux, I couldn't remember. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fog that hung over me. I was too tired, and this was harder than I'd imagined. As initiates, we'd mostly focused on the theory of things which we would later apply as apprentices. I plucked a few berries off the bush, brought them close to my nose, and smelled them. A sweet aroma made my stomach lurch with hunger. I crushed one between my thumb and forefinger, pondering. The sweet scent grew stronger. Yes, definitely wild blueberries. I popped one into my mouth and bit it. Juice squirted out of the side of my mouth. I waited for several minutes, and when I didn't feel any more miserable than I already did, I decided the berries were safe to eat. A large stone by the bush served as my stool as I sat picking berries and stuffing them into my mouth. I ate until my teeth felt on edge from the acid and my stomach clenched in refusal. The trees around me swayed. I looked up at them, smiling. They were so pretty with their purple blooms and dancing branches. I wiggled my toes between the makeshift bandage. They were practically wearing a dress of lace and silk. "Lucky toes?" I said. "Luckiest toes to ever live." Did that make me the luckiest girl to ever live? I contemplated, rubbing my chin. A chipmunk climbed out of a hole and watched me warily. "Hey, little fellow. Are you hungry?" I held out a blueberry, but the chipmunk kept its distance. Tossing it lightly, I got it close enough to the little critter. The chipmunk built up its courage and, without taking its beady eyes off me, approached the berry. It picked it up and smelled it, turning it round and round between its paws, and then, with an unhappy chitter, it tossed it aside and stuck its tongue out at me. "Hey, how dare you? Those are perfectly good berries." I shook my finger at the retreating chipmunk. "I'll show you." I stood, stumbling from side to side, picked a few more berries, and stuffed them into my mouth. "I wouldn't eat those if I were you," a man's voice said from the side. Chewing, a dribble of juice running down my chin, I turned toward the voice and searched the brush for my chipmunk friend. But it wasn't there, and in its place, I found a pair of moccasin boots. Frowning at them, my gaze moved upward. The boots were attached to a pair of leather brown pants, which were attached to a torso in a leather vest, which was attached to a head. I frowned at the head. "You're not a chipmunk," I said. The not a chipmunk sighed. "Too late, I guess." He came closer and swatted the berries off my hand. "Hey!" I protested. "Maybe it's better this way." The not a chipmunk scanned me up and down, then scooped me off my feet and cradled me in his arms. Blinking, I stared at him up close. "Do I know you?" He didn't say anything and began to walk. "You look familiar." He grunted. I drank in his features, his short dark hair, his strong jaw, and aquiline nose, his strange emerald-colored irises. "Call?" I asked. He smiled a crooked smile that did something to me. I'm not sure what, but next thing I knew, my head was on his shoulder, and I was going to sleep. Chapter 19. My awareness returned in stages. The first thing I noticed was the blissful warmth that surrounded me. My bones weren't frozen anymore, and the shivers had stopped. Better yet, my feet didn't hurt. I squirmed, enjoying the feel of the heavy blanket on me. I wriggled my toes, and they all seemed to be there. Smiling to myself, I sighed. It was just a horrible nightmare, Jazz. The Academy hadn't kicked me out, and, more importantly, they hadn't tried to kill me. What a ridiculous dream! I tried to roll over, but something stopped me. I jerked my arms. Something tugged them back, keeping them in place. Same with my legs. My eyes sprang open. The space around me was unfamiliar. The white ceiling I was used to was replaced by a grayish surface that grew narrower the further it rose. Smoke billowed out through a hole at the very top. I followed its path down to a pit of burning embers in the ground. This was a wigwam, a tent made of birch bark, hides, and reed mats. I closed my eyes and swallowed. I knew exactly where I was. A new nightmare, worse than the one I'd just come from. Wildlings. But what kind? Wolves, vampires, witches? Bucking like a wild stallion, I fought to free myself from my bonds. The cot, or whatever I was tied to, rattled and felt at the verge of tipping over a few times, but the ties around my wrists and ankles didn't give. The thick cover that lay on me slid off to the ground. That was when I discovered I was naked. I cursed, pressing my legs together and making an awkward effort to cover my breasts with my upper arms. It was useless. Where was my tattered dress? Where was the place card with Val's name that I'd hidden between its folds? A flap in the tent opened, letting light and a cold breeze in. Someone stepped inside. I looked away, hiding my face in shame. How humiliating for these wildlings to see me like this. Why had they brought me here? Were they waiting to feast on my entrails the way they had feasted on Telos? "You're awake," a female voice said. Either a wolf or a witch, since a vampire couldn't have been out in daylight. She came closer, picked up the blanket, and draped it over me. "How do you feel?" she asked, her tone gentle and full of concern. She squatted next to the cot and tucked the blanket around me. "What do you care?" I snapped, turning to look the woman in the eye with as much defiance as I could muster. The effect was lost, however, when my jaw fell open at the sight of the beautiful wildling. Her sun-kissed face seemed to glow as she smiled at me. Rich brown hair fell to her shoulders in waves, and small tresses threaded with colorful string. Her eyes were hazel and inquisitive. She smelled of earth and sweat and wildflowers. Her shoulders were bare, with a strapless leather top. She looked to be in her early 20s, and faked enough charm to make it appear as if she were actually concerned about me. All in all, a beguiling female wildling no civilized person should trust. "You ate a good number of elderberries, it seems," she said. Elderberries? I started to shake my head to contradict her, but the fact that I couldn't remember what had happened after I swallowed the first few berries was a clear sign that I'd made a huge mistake. "I gave you starweed tea to stave off some of its effect, though you might have a tender stomach for some time." She made a face that let me know it wouldn't be pleasant. "My name is Ela, by the way. I'm the pack's healer." "Pack healer? Wolf, then." "Why?" "I guess because I'm good with plants." "No, why did you help me? You're murderers. You killed my friend, ate his entrails. Why help me?" "That was another pack," she said courtly. "Besides, that's what a healer does." She stood, walked around the pit, and poked the hot embers with a stick. "Untie me," I hissed between clenched teeth. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Jazz." "How do you know my name?" Ela ignored my question and continued. "We can't have you trying to escape. There is really nowhere you can go, so just rest. I'll come by later with something for you to eat and more salve for your toes." She gave me another smile and exited through the flap. "Hey, come back! You can't leave me here like this!" I fought with the ties around my wrists and feet to no avail. "Come back, you savage witch! You infernal skunk! You wildling!" I yelled, getting more and more creative with my insults, but it did no good. She didn't come back to slap me or even tell me to shut up. I bucked up and down some more, but all I managed to do was upset my stomach. It lurched violently until vomit threatened its way up my throat, and I had to lay as still as possible until things settled back down. Tears trickled down into my eyes as I silently cried. My life had turned to misery in the blink of an eye. How was it possible for someone's fortune to change direction so utterly? There should be a rule against that. At least, someone should give you a warning. Chapter 20. "Let me through!" An angry female voice shouted outside the tent. Her voice carried power like the thundering current of a river after a storm. "Desna, you need to leave." I recognized the second voice. It was Howl, the wolf wildling with the green eyes. How? Lux, I'd somehow ended in their clutches after all. "A city rat has no place here. By the chiefess's orders, she's to be kept safe," Howl said. I would have scratched my head if I wasn't tied down. Why would the chiefess, the pack's main alpha, want to keep me safe? It had to be worse than whatever this Desna wanted to do to me, and, very likely, involved making sausages with my intestines. "Don't look so cocksure, Howl," the female said. "Soon you'll answer to me and only me, and when that time comes, you'll be ready to lick my boots." I waited for Howl to say something, but he didn't. Men always liked having the last word, but maybe he was a coward of some kind. Or a classy guy, I almost laughed. Since the latter wasn't a possibility, that meant it had to be the former. There was silence for a while as I lay restlessly on the cot, growing drowsy with the heat from the campfire. "Greetings, Ela," Howl's deep voice said, startling me out of my stupor. The flap to the tent opened, and the healer came back in, her hands holding two bowls, one steaming, the other covered with a piece of cloth and fastened with brown string. "Hungry?" Ela asked, setting her bowl on a small wooden stool next to the cot. "Yes, I am," I lied. The thought of eating anything made my stomach flip, but she would have to untie me if she expected me to hold a spoon. "That's a good sign," she said, rolling up a blanket and placing it under my head. Sitting on a second stool, she picked up one of the bowls and brought it to my lips. What? She was going to feed me? Me, what was I, a baby? I almost said I wasn't hungry anymore, but I wanted to gain her trust, since I might learn something useful from her. I took a sip of what she offered. It was warm and tasted very good. "Do you like it?" she asked. I nodded, trying not to look surprised. "It's rat broth," she said. I gagged and started coughing. Ela threw her head back and laughed. "Denizens do believe we eat rats, then." My stomach churned. I wrinkled my nose and turned away. Not agreeing with you? She set the bowl down, looking concerned. I shook my head. Rat will never agree with me. It's not rat, you silly. It's vegetable broth. She placed a hand on my middle and felt me through the blanket. Does it hurt? No, it's just turning. She gave a nod. That's normal. But maybe no more broth until tomorrow. Good idea. Now your feet. Ela moved to the front of the cot and pushed the blanket out of the way. I craned my neck to see the extent of the damage. Not bad, she said. A bit more salve wouldn't hurt, though. They look almost as if nothing happened. That was what I wanted to say, but I couldn't bring myself to express the awe I felt. Ela removed the cloth lid off the smaller clay bowl, stuck 2 fingers inside, and scooped out a greenish substance. A little bit here, she said, running her fingers across my ankle. My stomach tightened with revulsion as images of rolling bodies in the pit flooded me, cold limbs brushing mine. I tensed, doing my best not to kick Ela. And here. She tickled my toes, but I managed not to flinch. Are you all right? She asked when she noticed my tense expression. I managed a nod and diverted her attention with a question. It's witchcraft, isn't it? We do trade with some of the witch covens from time to time, she said, her hazel eyes giving me a mischievous glance. Don't tell me you'd rather have scars and take weeks to heal. That's how it works for denizens, right? I said nothing. There was always a price to pay for witchcraft, but I doubted Ela would see my point. I started. There was a small card with a name in my dress. Where is it? This, you mean? She reached under the cot and produced the place card. I nodded, feeling a measure of relief. It's safe. She put it back under the cot. What does the chieftess want with me? I asked. Ela's hands stopped applying the salve to my cuts. What makes you think she wants something with you? She asked, suspicion in her expression. She said I was to be kept safe. What for? Ela turned her face toward the flap and called out in anger, Call? A mop of long honey-colored hair threaded with braids appeared through the hole. I just relieved Call. What do you need, princess? He asked, wiggling his unibrow and flashing yellow eyes in my direction. He was the one who killed Magistrate Candor. My first instinct was to reproach him, but the Academy magistrates all deserved to die. I've told you to stop calling me that. Ela frowned as he gave her a toothy grin. I know you, I said, after taking a good look at the guy. You're one of the wildlings that tried to kidnap me. Hello there, Sheila. He waved, as if we were in a parade or something. My name is Jasmine Bronte, I said. If you want to call me anything else, Jazz will do. Yes, Ela snarled through clenched teeth. Her name is Jazz. Now get out of here and keep your mouth shut. So bossy, he said, sticking his tongue out at Ela, then turning to me. Well, Jazz, I'm Maki, and I did try to kidnap you. Sorry we failed. Sorry we failed? I echoed in disbelief. These wildlings were shameless. If they hadn't failed, they would have saved you a lot of pain, Ela said, standing up and gathering her bowls. She hid her face from me as I tried to figure out her meaning. For a moment, it seemed she was referring to more than just the damage to my feet and my unfortunate run-in with the elderberries. But how could she know what happened before that? How could she even begin to suspect the extent of the pain I'd endured? Ela stood by the exit, her arms cradling the salve and broth. "Tomorrow, my mother will speak to you, and everything will be clear." "Your mother?" She nodded. "The chiefess." Ela stepped outside, but before leaving, she called out, "Sleep well, Jazz." For a moment, I thought she was going to call me Sheila, but she didn't. I wondered what the word meant. Something bad, probably. Uglier than Dennison or City Rat. The chiefess wanted to speak with me. That was interesting. And worrisome. How was I to sleep while I waited for that to happen? But I shouldn't have worried, because soon the uncomfortable warmth that filled the tent made me drowsy again and fooled me into a state of well-being too hard to ignore after what I'd been through. After a while, a slight scraping sound woke me up. Someone was by the pit, adding more wood. A set of glowing green eyes flashed in my direction. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you," Call said in that deep voice of his that was almost a rumble from his chest. He was crouching, looking almost predatory in that pose, and for some reason I couldn't fathom, I was reminded that under the blanket I was naked. "It's the other kidnapper," I said, doing my best not to sound intimidated by his presence. "My name is Call, as you well remember." He smiled in a way that made me watch his lips. They were full and with a pronounced Cupid's bow. And how in the hell did he know I remembered his name? "I was just making sure you didn't get cold through the night." He stood, walked to the edge of the cot, and peered down at me. "Why do they crop your hair like that?" "It's practical," I said in a defensive tone that had no right being there. The Academy had betrayed me. I owed no loyalty to it or any of the liars that called it their home. "Is that the only reason?" He moved in a hypnotizing way. I blinked and glanced away. "Yep, that's it." It was a lie, and I sensed he knew that. Yes, practicality was one of the reasons. For instance, short hair was easier to care for, and it was also safer during battle. But there were other reasons which all had to do with our vow of celibacy and the attraction to the opposite sex. Call scoffed. I glanced back. Gradually, his eyes stopped glowing until they looked perfectly human, though their particular shade of green would have still made anyone pause and look twice. His gaze bore into mine, unrelenting. I refused to look away again and held my ground. His pupils seemed depthless as I tumbled into them, a sense of something wild and dangerous taking hold of me. Heat filled my chest and traveled downward, appearing to kiss my naked skin as it moved. My nipples hardened, and a familiar wetness grew between my legs. I'd had nights during which my body quivered and craved things I'd never had, nights where my fingers found secret places to caress, and images of Val's strong body filled my mind. But those feelings had no place here, not with this savage. He inhaled deeply, his attention sliding to my middle. "You would look pretty with long hair," he suddenly said, then left the tent while I tried to tell myself that the heat from the embers was responsible for the feverish feeling that kept me up the rest of the night. Chapter 21. The next morning, Ela came into the tent carrying a woven basket. She set it on the ground, then proceeded to untie my hands from the cot. The idea of escape occurred to me, but I wouldn't get far naked, or dragging a cot, since she didn't untie my feet. She reached in the basket, pulled out a garment, and handed it over. "Put this tunic on. It's mine, but I think it will fit." Clothes! One step closer to the escape I was imagining. "This is for your breasts." She handed over a long strip of cloth. I nodded, doing my best to appear meek. I wished for a bra, but it was too much to expect from backward savages. She helped me bind my breasts. Then I slid the garment on. It was soft and fit pretty well. "We're the same size," Ela said with an odd, fond smile. Looking apologetic, she bound my hands again, this time in front of me. "Sorry, it's for your own good." "Yeah, right." "At least your feet will be free," she enthused as she removed the ropes around my ankles. Next, she removed a pair of leggings and fringed moccasin boots from the basket and set them on the cot. "I can help you put these on." "Thank you, I can do it on my own." It was awkward with my hands tied as they were, but I managed. The leggings were snug, flexible, and, I hated to admit, comfortable. Same for the boots. Everything turned out to be a surprisingly accurate fit. Still, I felt ridiculous dressed in deerskin from head to toe and sorely missed my uniform. When I was done pulling the leggings up and tying the cord around my waist, I searched under the cot, found the place card, and picked it up. As I straightened, I collapsed back on the cot, the world swaying. "Take it easy. You're still recovering." I nodded. She gestured toward where I'd stashed the place card. "Is that piece of paper that important to you?" She wouldn't understand my reasons. Besides, I didn't owe her an explanation. I shrugged. With a sigh, Ela reached into the basket a third time. "Some food should help build your strength back up. Eat slowly. It should agree with you since it's plain." She offered me something wrapped in broad leaves. I took the bundle and found that it held what looked like a dry patty made from corn. My stomach seemed to agree with her assessment, since it didn't turn at the sight of the simple offering. I took a bite and chewed with care. "Thank you," I mumbled begrudgingly. Her smile widened. Lux, she had to be the happiest person I'd ever met. That, or she had a condition that made her grin like an idiot. It's all lies, I told myself. Everyone is full of them. I'd seen with my own eyes what they were capable of. But even if I hadn't, after the Academy's betrayal, I would never be able to trust anyone again. "You look better. I'm glad," Ela said as she turned to leave. "Now wait a moment here and don't try anything stupid. There are 3 guards posted outside." I huffed. "The chiefess will be here to see you in a moment." I stiffened, wondering at what was to come. I knew whatever the woman had to say wouldn't be good. Still, I would be strong, and I wouldn't stop fighting until I was free of the wildlings and far away from Lux City and the Academy. A few minutes after I finished my food, the chiefess entered the tent without preamble. She was a woman of about 40, with dark hair parted in the middle and 2 braids falling to her shoulders. She had prominent cheekbones and narrow eyes. Her body was slender, arms and hands bearing many tattoos and scars. Her face was also inked with straight lines from mouth to chin, and a V in the middle of her forehead. I could definitely see the family resemblance between Ela and the woman, and could tell from her piercing gaze that she was someone no one should trifle with. "Greetings, Jasmine Bronte," she said, nodding once and sitting on a low stool across from the pit. "Welcome. I am Chiefess Yura, alpha leader of this pack." I said nothing and simply took in her elaborate clothes, the leather vest stitched with threads of different colors that was nothing like the plain tunic they'd given me, the expertly reinforced trousers with elaborate patterns at the knees, the practical boots apt for treading quietly through the forest. For an instant, I found myself wondering if there was some sort of knowledge I could gain from this meeting, something that could help me get in the Academy's good graces again. But I immediately chastised myself for that stupid idea. I wanted nothing to do with those murderers. "Now, I will tell you why you're here and not dead for trespassing into our territory," she said in a straightforward way. There was something honest about her tone and expression that made me want to trust her. The only problem was that I couldn't rely on my own judgment anymore. I'd believed the Academy, and look at how that had turned out. Besides, they were keeping me against my will, tied and guarded, when they were the ones that needed to be restrained. They ate people for Lux's sake. "This is not your territory," I said, letting my anger flow. "Wildlings own no land as they have no laws." Chiefess Yura remained calm, regarding me as if I were an insolent child who should be pitied. My fingernails dug into my palms. Lessons from my teachers resonated inside my head. Don't ever think yourself smarter than a wildling. They're cunning and will almost always outsmart you, especially when you think you have the upper hand. I shook my head, pushing those teachings aside, fearing I would start doubting them. What if they were also lies? They didn't feel like it, but I had to, from now on, learn to make my own judgments. Listen and learn, Jazz. The chiefess let me stew for a moment, a spark in her dark eyes that told me she was enjoying my discomfort. When she finally spoke, it was to turn my already confused mind into a pit full of questions. "Like you," she said, "I was once a student of the Lux Academy." Chapter 22. Chiefess Yura's words erased my anger in one fell swoop. Incredulity replaced it. There was no way a wildling chiefess could have been a Lux Academy student. It was absurd, and I told her as much. "That's not true." My voice was firm, certain. "What makes you so sure? You don't think you're the only one who's ever managed to escape, do you?" Escape had been almost impossible, and I only managed it because I didn't drink the wine. I faked a suicide, played dead, climbed out of a mass grave, jumped from a tree, not to mention that wildling attacked at the right time. Of course she hadn't been that lucky. Still, my mouth opened and closed as I fought for the right words to explain all of that. "I know the lies they tell the initiates, Jazz," the chiefess said. "If I repeat them to you, would that help you believe me?" When my shock subsided, I had the sense to glance down at her wrist and search for her coda. But if she'd ever had one, the elaborate tattoos that covered her arms hid it now. Noticing where my attention had settled, she wrapped her left hand around her opposite wrist and rubbed it around. "I hated that thing," she said. "The way it marked me. I much preferred my choice of tattoos. I only left this. She stretched out her right hand, palm up, and pointed at a section of unmarked skin, the space where her coda was supposedly never completed. I turned my wrist over and touched the gap in my own coda. I would never be an apprentice. A pang of regret hit me despite everything, and I hated myself for it. I should consider myself lucky, but... My gaze bounced to the chiefess's wrist. The tattoos that covered her arm were so intricate that there was no real way of telling if she ever had a coda. Besides, she was a wolf shifter. She had to be to lead a pack. They would never accept a wolf at the academy. "I see you don't believe me," Chiefess Yura said. "What does it matter if I believe you or not?" The world had turned on its head, and I didn't want anything else to do with it. Wildlings or Lux City residents alike. "It matters," she said. The obvious question was, why? But I kept my lips sealed and my expression severe. Chiefess Yura smiled with pity. "You," I spat. "I don't need your pity." "Watch your tongue, girl," she growled between clenched teeth. I shuddered involuntarily and did my best to hide it. She took a deep breath. "I know you don't need my pity, but I feel it nonetheless because I know what you're going through. The doubt, that plunging sensation that there's no one else in the world you can trust. The realization that, so far, your life has been a complete lie." I felt like an open book. She was describing how I felt to perfection. I didn't bother to deny any of it. There was no point. Maybe she did know about the academy and the way it operated. Maybe she even had answers to all the questions bouncing inside my head. "Okay, I'll play along," I said. She nodded once and spoke, acquiring a faraway tone. "I was at the academy for 13 years. I was the best in my year, sure to become an apprentice. One night before the reaping, I was having trouble sleeping. Something was bothering me, a foreboding that wouldn't relent. Against the rules, I left my dormitory, hoping to clear my mind. I managed to sneak past a couple of careless guards and somehow ended up by the library. I thought reading a boring history book might make me sleepy again, so I went in. But a gathering was taking place. Everything she'd said so far seemed plausible. There was a library on the first floor of one of the dorms, and the magistrates sometimes held private meetings there, taking advantage of the large oak table in the middle of the room. But for all I knew, she'd gained this knowledge from a servant or drunk guard. "What I heard next," she continued, "changed my life, not to mention the fact that it also saved it. They were discussing the names of those who would become apprentices and those who would instead have to die." I held my breath, my chin quivering with all the emotions coursing through my body. "All the magistrates voted unanimously against me," she said. "I was to die because I was too powerful." I frowned. "Why would they reject you if you were powerful?" "I think because the coda and the magic behind it can't restrain your true nature. Unfortunately, that's just a guess, but perhaps you know the real reason, and you can tell me." Was that what she was after? Information on her enemies? I laughed. Maybe I'm not a member of the Academy anymore, but that doesn't make me a traitor to my principles. Everyone would be better off without you wildlings. Look at the state of the rest of the world. Lux City is a haven compared to that. Chiefess Yura sighed and sat straighter. I expected her anger once more, but she remained impassive. Have you ever left these lands before? Why would I want to? You want to now, don't you? I bit my tongue. You only know what the Academy has told you. And what do you know? You live in the woods like a savage. I know more than you can imagine. I have been to the rest of the world, as you call it, and it's not as bad as the Academy would have you believe. It is simply different. She paused for a few beats, then continued where she'd left off. Yes, what the magistrates did made no sense to me either. Why would they get rid of powerful students? I kept listening, but they didn't go into any details. There was also no talk about the lives we'd been promised outside of the Academy. Instead, they talked about the deaths of hundreds of initiates, as if we were nothing but insects. These were the teachers who had nurtured us for years. Some felt like parents to us. And yet... She swallowed a thick lump and inhaled sharply. She was either being honest or she was a good actress. I went back to my dormitory and tried to tell myself it was all a nightmare, and I would wake up soon. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, we left to celebrate the last day of indulgence, and I walked away from Lux City forever. I wanted to tell my friends, bring them with me, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. My closest friends had been chosen anyway. That made it easier to go. Since then, I've made it my responsibility to unmask the Academy and break the chains they've cast over our lands. She paused and blinked, as if coming back to the moment. They trade in lies, Jazz, she added. You must understand that now. What is this all really about? I asked, unable to admit to her, a wildling, that any of the things she'd said meant anything to me. Before I even left the Academy on my own, 3 of your dogs tried to kidnap me. I think that's what caused the magistrates to reject me. Why did you send them? What did you want from me? She chuckled. You remind me so much of myself, Jazz. All of a sudden, she grew serious. Don't worry. It might take time, but everything will be clear soon. However, I know that nothing I say will make a difference. You have to see with your own eyes to believe. That was the case with me as well. You can't keep me against my will, I said, thrusting my bound hands in her direction. I'm afraid we can. I'm afraid I have to. There's not much time to explain. Time is of the essence. I need you. The pack needs you. I shook my head. Why would savages need a city rat? Unless you plan to feed me to your wolves. It was a stupid thing to say. I didn't want to become Chow, and maybe I'd just given her the idea. You're not a denizen or a city rat, Jazz. That's just another lie the Academy fed you. In truth, you are what you so disdainfully call a wildling.